Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the HFSC monthly board meeting. It's February 12th. It's 9:01 a.m. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Just as a note today, we have a couple of voice votes and we have one roll call vote for this meeting. So just want to let you know. We are going to go ahead and move to agenda item 2, which is our roll call and confirmation of a presence of a quorum. Please, board members, unmute yourself at this time. And Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Chairwoman Mitchell.
Here.
Vice Chair Lenschke.
Here.
Director Vasquez.
Present.
Director Hilder.
Present.
Director Medina.
Here.
Director Blansett.
Present.
Director Cohen. Director Moore.
Present.
Director Huff.
Here.
Director Calabrese.
Present.
All right, we have a quorum. Yay. All right. The HFSC board meeting today is being conducted by video conference. This meeting is being held in compliance with Governor Abbott's suspension of certain provisions of the Texas Open Meetings Act in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency. The board is mindful of the health and safety of its members, staff, presenters, and the public, so we are utilizing video conferencing today in an effort to slow the spread of COVID-19. Agenda item 3 is public comment. We are providing 2 ways for the public to comment during this meeting in accordance with the governor's directive. First, the board meeting notice providing an email address for members of the public to send requests to speak during the public comment period. Those requests had to have been sent to us by Thursday, February 11th at 9 a.m. So that was yesterday. Madam Secretary, did we receive any requests for comments by email?
No, Madam Chair, we did not receive any emails from the public to speak at our board meeting today.
Okay. To make sure that we're giving the public every opportunity to participate in this meeting, I will also open the floor now to provide time for anyone from the public who has joined the video conference and was not able to sign up in advance. If there is anyone who would like to speak at this time, please unmute yourself and state your name. Each member of the public will have 3 minutes to speak. Now let's see, do we have anyone that's on? That's scrolling through. Okay, I'm going to leave the public comment period open just for a few more minutes, just in case someone pops in because they could have some internet issues. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4. We have several meeting minutes that we've got to approve. So today we will consider meeting minutes from the December 11th regular board meeting, as well as the December 29th and January 13th special board meetings. I'm going to introduce each of these meeting items as a separate agenda item so that we can vote or abstain as appropriate. All 3 voting items will require just a voice vote, okay? So at this time, we're going to look at agenda item 4, which is the meeting minutes from the December 11th, 2020 board meeting. At this time, we will conduct the voice vote to approve the meeting minutes. Members, please unmute your mics. And do we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes? Was that Director Moore?
Oh,
Was that you, Lois?
yes.
Okay, then you made the motion. Now I need a second.
Second.
Thank you, Director Hilder. Are there any discussion or any corrections that need to be made to the December 11th meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none. All in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries and passes unanimously. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to agenda item 5, which is the draft meeting minutes of December 29th, 2020 special board meeting. At this time, we will conduct another voice vote to approve the meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I make a motion to approve.
Okay, Director Blansett made the motion. Second?
I second.
Go ahead.
Okay, Director Vasquez seconded that motion. Is there any corrections or any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right, any abstentions? All right, great. The motion carries unanimously, and the meeting minutes for December 29, 2020 are approved. All right, agenda item 6. We are really rolling this morning. The draft meeting minutes for January 13th, 2021 special board meeting. At this time, we are going to also conduct a voice vote to approve these minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, Director Moore made the motion to approve. Second?
Second.
Okay, great. Who was that? Oh, Philip, was that you?
No, That was Frank. me.
Oh, Frank, I'm sorry. Director Medina made this, seconded the motion. All righty, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, any abstentions? All right, great. The motion carries and passes unanimously. Thank you so much. All right, agenda item number 7 is the chair's report. For this, I really don't have a whole lot other than, just
Hello?
saying good morning.
Ellen.
Director Cohen.
Yeah.
Good morning.
I'm on the phone.
Okay, great. We're glad you're able
Thank
to
you.
join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're on agenda item number 7, Director Cohen.
That was fast. Okay.
We approved the meeting minutes for the last 3 meetings that we've had, so they've moved pretty quickly.
Okay. Thank you.
Really, the only thing on my report is just I wanted to make an observation that, we're almost a year into where COVID has really affected us quite a bit. And, I know it's been really tough and we've all been hanging in there and adjusting. And I just want everyone on the board and also with HFSC just to remember, take care of yourself. It's rough. We still got a little ways to go with it, but things are moving along, particularly with vaccine distribution. But just, take some moments for yourself, celebrate yourself and your family, and, we'll get through it. All right. Agenda item number 8 is a report from Dr. Stout. Please remember, as our corporate officers and staff members present today, many of them will be sharing their screens as they speak to us. When that happens, the videos will go to the bottom of the screen if you're on the computer. If you have the raise your hand function and you have a question, please try and use that. But if you don't, that's okay as well. And the speakers will pause during their presentations to allow for questions, and I'll be keeping a track too of some of the hands so we can try and make sure everyone is heard. Your questions and your comments will be heard. Alrighty, agenda item 8 is the report from Dr. Peter Stout, who is our president and CEO, including an update on renovations at the Vehicle Examination Building, outreach efforts, staffing, the pandemic and fiscal year 2022 budget needs for the crime scene unit expansion, as well as toxicology and firearm capital expenses. Dr. Stout, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you much. Good morning, y'all. Oops, let me get that out of there. All righty. I will try and do this before I freeze up and my mouth stops working, because the garage is just a little cool this morning.
I'm actually on the computer now.
Terrific. Good to have you. We see you.
Well, I saw you.
you.
All right, I'm going to hang up the phone.
Okay. All right. So turnaround times, productivity, kind of top end here. We're still floating around 100 days total average turnaround time. Do want to point out the definitely outsized effort of toxicology this last month, since they represent half of the reports that went out the door. They have been, they had another couple of people signed off for alcohol reports, and it shows they have been cranking through stuff in a fearsome fashion. All right, there we go. So staffing, we continue to do pretty well on the staffing front and recruiting. We're currently
Dr. Stout,
Yes.
were you meaning to share your screen with everybody?
Crap. Yes.
Okay, because it's not being shared.
Yeah, it's not, is it?
No.
There we go.
All right, there we
Okay.
go. Thank you.
All right, that works better now, doesn't it? And you can hear me and you can see me. All of that stuff works. So staffing stuff, we're currently sitting at 208 staff, same makeup with the City of Houston civilians, one toxicology fellow from the Army. At the moment, we have 10 open positions. However, in the last couple of days, we have a couple of offers that have been accepted. We've got one other offer that's outstanding, should hear back soon on an experienced crime scene investigator, and one that's outstanding for one of the forensic biology positions that's outstanding. So that'll probably change here in the next couple of days. We do have a new opening that we just posted yesterday for a NIBIN technician from a resignation. So that'll be hopefully getting filled. Any questions around the staffing front? Certifications, quite a few have shown up here in the last month. We had 4 in crime scene get their crime scene analyst certification from International Association of Identification. So continue to make good progress there. Brent Larson in multimedia got his Celebrate operators certificate. Celebrate, remember, is one of the main developers of tools that we use to get into mobile devices. And Chris Herring in Client Services got his Property and Evidence Specialist certification. So congratulations to all of them. And we keep making progress on the certifications. Fair bit of outreach stuff. We are starting to deal with discussions with city council members as we work through all of the budget discussions that have to occur. So council member Edward Pollard and Amy Peck and Alcorn have all been through the laboratory here recently. Good conversations with them, very positive. We've had a couple of small group tours. John Quinlan, who owns the 500 Jefferson building, came with a couple family members. And then we also had a high school student who is interested in forensics. She actually was the daughter of a naval officer who's deployed in Africa. So yeah, I got a soft spot for that. And then staff outreach continues to do pretty good. We've had a little bit more in the way of actual in-person events, the shifting changes in this, but still they've been doing a really good job of getting out and attending things. One that I do point out there, because we get asked often, do we work with the HPD academies? Yes, we do. So you can see James Miller was there at one of the academies talking about seized drugs and drug packaging, all things to do with drug evidence at one of the academy meetings. So we are regularly at the academies talking about evidence issues and issues with the laboratory. I will be really glad if there ever comes a time that we can quit talking about COVID, but where we're at on COVID, we have actually, I think since we had to put this together, we've had a little bit of change in this and have confirmed a few more. I think we've got almost 140 of the staff vaccinated now, at least the first dose. We have a list with the health department right now that has 30 individuals on it that are still in line to get done. I have to give the health department an awful lot of credit here. They have done a marvelous job with what has to be an impossible situation. I can't really say when those 30 are going to get picked up. Every time it's happened for us, it's been kind of a last minute call, but we're happy to respond and do whatever we can with it. But we're down to 30 that still need the first dose. And actually, we will probably start having people get their second dose, I think, within this next week. So we've made a good bit of progress on that. Our thought is once we have everybody with their second dose and a couple of weeks past that second dose, there's the point that we start talking about, are we going to bring groups back in? So we're probably about 8 weeks out from that, roughly. Any questions on where we're at COVID-wise? I think at the moment, we don't have but a handful of people that are out. I think maybe 3 that are still out. We have a couple of people that have been lingeringly positive, asymptomatic, recovered from symptoms, but still positive for quite some time. A couple of people that are quarantining because they've got a household positive. Nobody with any significant symptoms currently.
Well, this is great. I'm glad, and I want to thank the city of Houston for
No question.
helping, getting everyone at HFSC the opportunity, since we are on the front lines, and their processes and all. I mean, this is tremendous, and this is huge for us and for the city. Director Blanchett, you have a question?
Yes, are all the staff agreeing to be vaccinated? Is anybody asking not to be for whatever reason, or?
Yeah, so you see in there, we have currently 41 that have opted out. So
Yeah,
at this juncture, and I think this is kind of the prevailing logic on things, is it's a voluntary thing. Out of that 41, what I can say of that 41 is there are probably 10 within that group that are getting the vaccine through some other route, not through us. There's probably 10 in there that are pregnant, and CDC is recommending pregnant folks not get the vaccine. There are probably 10 in there that have some actual significant health circumstance that would prevent them from it. And then that last 10 are maybe those that are a little hesitant. So I think by the time it really comes down to the discussion nationally about what do we do around people who are really resistant, we will have a very small handful of people that might fall in that bucket.
okay.
And so you think, I mean, right now we've got 80% of the staff basically that are willing to take the vaccine right off the bat.
Okay. And also, I've been hearing some things in the news about even those who are vaccinated still have to have masking and some social distancing.
Yes.
And I presume that all our protocols around that will still exist for some time. Even
Yes,
after
and
vaccination.
that's the messaging that we have been putting out internally is this is great. When we're all vaccinated, it gives us some opportunity to change how we're working. But for the foreseeable future, it's still going to be an issue of masking, trying to keep people apart as much as we can. Those things still have to be in place.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions around COVID handling? All right. So vehicle evidence building, probably the last time we need to even make a mention of the VEB because it's done. Turned out, while there certainly are still some things we would like to do there and we will keep picking at, it's turned out quite nicely. Probably this image down here gives you the best sense. These two car bays here are what used to be open, are now enclosed, have doors. All of the HVAC has been replaced. Much, much nicer from that front. Of course, we have immediately kept the place full. Here is what a typical day looks like in the VEB lot. And it is a musical chairs exercise and moving vehicles around because it is almost always full, and full to the point that they're having to stage vehicles in other hold lots. It is a significant load that's going through the VEB. All of the IT stuff that we have talked about, so that's all been finished. The construction around that is all in place. All the equipment's in place. Almost all the changeovers are finished off. So now we have a redundant connection to the interwebs through the VEB. So we've got some diversity of pathway is what we've been after with all of this for all of our connections to the internet. Any questions about VEB? Anything there? We've gotten all the invoicing and everything taken care of for the grant circumstances. So I think we can put a big done sign on this one.
No, congratulations. Of course, you proved it, build it, and they will come. So
Yeah.
But, this is great to complete a project. This is fantastic because this will just make things, so much easier for for the CSI. So that's great.
Oh, it is. And they had been, the conditions there were pretty poor. So I'm hopeful this will make things more comfortable for them, better evidence quality, better evidence preservation through there. And again, I got to give an awful lot of acknowledgement to the city, Richard Vela and his crew have been really, really helpful with this. So city's done a marvelous job here. Thank you.
Yes, many thanks to the city of Houston. Absolutely.
An update that I wanted to put in here, because last year's budget, we talked about procuring the UFED software, and it's got a pretty steep price tag to it. It is about $150,000 a year for one license. So wanted to just give you an update of what we're seeing from that software. So here's a comparison of the period prior to having the UFED software and what we were able to open and post UFED software. So I think that the big headline there is we had about a 38% success rate before we had UFED. We have about a 42% success rate now. So it's increased. You would have hoped it would have been more than that. However, like I point out, we have one license. So we can plug in one phone at a time. If that phone takes 90 days, we're not unlocking other phones. So really that 42% success rate reflects a greater capability of getting phones open. We just have very limited capacity. Now, what we are looking to do is, and this is the nature of multimedia, it is a constant arms race. GrayKey, which is the product that we were using pre-UFED, has gotten better about its ability to open some types of phones. So we are rejiggering how we have licensure. We're going to reduce the capability and the costs that we're spending in UFED and increase what we're spending on GrayKey to try and balance better capabilities between the two softwares to open as many phones as we can. This is a continuous reevaluation of which of these software packages gives us the best abilities and try and balance that with cost. So any questions I can answer around this one? I will talk at the end of the budget stuff. Multimedia is one of the spots that worries me. We are seeing a continuing increase of requests, demands, devices. As I say, it is a constant arms race in multimedia. And we've got some backlogs there that we have not had before because of that increasing demand. I worry about the needs that we have in multimedia, but it's not sure it's time in this budget to address it, but certainly next budget, it's going to be one of the places we probably need to address. Director Blanchett, I see you've got a hand up there.
Yeah, I noticed the success rate for these phones is rather low. It's less than 50% in both cases.
Yep.
Is there any kind of software agreement that you have with the company that allows them to improve their rate?
So with the UFED software, what we have is basically a book of coupons that we can send phones to Celebrite for them to work on as well if we are unable to open something with the software. We have used some of that in some cases. Even there, sometimes they can't get them open. It is always a little bit of a hit and miss circumstance of whether you can actually force open one of these phones, and encryptions keep getting harder. The phone companies, I mean, it's an arms race. I don't really know how other way to put it. You can develop softwares that will find one exploit and the manufacturers will fill in that exploit, and you got to go looking for another one. But we do have some ability with Celebrite to utilize their laboratory as well within the cost that we already spend with them.
Okay. And so how often do they do an upgrade whenever they find out there are some phones and, I don't know, exploits you can get around?
Yes. So again, another part of the arms race in multimedia, and part of our, actually, this is one of the big challenges in the accreditation aspect of multimedia, is upgrades, patches, refinements to software happen constantly. I mean, this is almost a daily circumstance of getting upgrades and patches to software tools that we use. And so what it creates then on the accreditation side is, what does validating, maintaining version control of software, what does that mean? Because those are accreditation requirements. Well, when you've got software being patched and upgraded basically daily, it can get to be a real challenge. But yes, there are constant upgrades to these things.
Okay, because I would question the value of, say, $150,000 a year
Yep.
license when the success rate starts
it's
to drop.
If it's not getting better. And that's in part why we are going to reconfigure what we're paying in licensure. We'll still, I think that $150,000 bucket is still what we will spend. It will be distributed differently between Gray Key and Cellebrite in order to try and optimize between the two tools. I saw one other hand go up there. Guess not. Any other questions? Okay. So probably main part of what I need to talk about today is the big framework of things that are in the budget. That David's got some of the budget discussion. You should have already seen the budget presentation that David put together and distributed. So if you have questions on stuff, this is the point. Make sure that you understand what it is we're looking to try and do in next year's budget. But primary thing that we do is public safety. And as we have talked about, I think for about a year, the biggest forest fire for us is crime scene. Out of all of this, I think it is very important to acknowledge that the city has serious financial challenges. We have had lots of discussions back and forth with the city about trying to find a mark that hopefully can work, understanding there are still some wild cards out there. What happens in terms of COVID relief at the federal level could significantly influence what the city can or can't do. The budget that we hopefully pass here today, we may have to come back and think about again, because things may change. It's just a reality for everybody in the world. We have gone at this with a very careful eye to try and address those things that are really the most serious issues. It doesn't mean that we are addressing all of the issues. And so at the end, I want to try and make sure that we touch so that everybody understands the risks that we're still leaving on the table. But reality is nobody can afford to deal with everything. We get that and make sure that we acknowledge that. And really, I don't envy the city at all right now, their choices and decisions they're going to have to make. I think hopefully everybody is pretty aware. Crime scenes workload this last year has gone up dramatically, and that's across everything. The thing that makes the news the most is the homicide rate that went up 40+% last calendar year, but pretty much everything went up for us. The vehicle exams went up considerably. Not all of those are tied to homicides. We get vehicles from robberies and other crimes as well. And also, while aggravated assaults went up for us, keep remembering, we respond to less than 1% of aggravated assaults that occur. So that increase in aggravated assault isn't an increase. That increase we see is not reflective of an increase in ag assaults, although I think they have actually increased. That's really reflective of HPD realizing and understanding and desiring to have CSIs at ag assaults for the benefit that comes for HPD. Yes, in my nerd opinion, we should be at every ag assault. We should be at every crime against person. We are nowhere even remotely close to scale to be able to do that, and that's part of what we have to try and address. But it's going to take years to get to that point. This is not a trend that's going away. We were just looking at numbers for homicides, and I think there were a couple of news articles even last night. So far this year, homicides are up 45% again for the period so far this calendar year compared to the same period last calendar year. This is a trend that's not slowing down, unfortunately. It's really pretty sobering when you think about what that means for the city. It's pretty sobering what it means for the workload through CSU. And yeah, I have worries what this is ultimately going to mean in terms of workloads that hit, particularly biology, firearms, latent prints, because that's where a lot of the evidence ultimately goes. But CSU is the one that is really struggling with it currently. You can see it in overtime figures. Crime scene is hands down the biggest consumer of overtime hours. Makes sense. I do point out in this, so NIBIN, which are the texts that are entering guns into the database, our guns have gone up a lot. Donna's going to talk some about guns later, and take it easy on both Donna and Karina, because we had an officer-involved shooting last night that impacted both of them, so I think they're both a little dazed from dealing with that. But so NIBIN is 4 technicians that use more overtime than all of client services, which is about 12 people. So while these numbers are much smaller, certainly they're not of, a financial challenge to us. It is reflective of, I think, the amount of work that is now flowing towards firearms. And again, as part of what concerns me, not ready to, in the grand scheme of all of the challenges that we face, I'm not sure it's a risk that everybody can afford to take on right now, but it is one of the risks that we're leaving on the table of how we address the rising demands in NIBIN. But crime scenes overtime is obviously high. We've talked some about all the impacts to crime scene. So just putting in a picture of the staff tenure. The average tenure right now is 3.7 years. So for an organization that is just now 6 years old, that's doing pretty good. And you can see 2019 is where we crossed the threshold of having anybody have the possibility of being a 5-year employee. That chunk of the population is growing of 5-year tenured employees. We do a pretty good job of hanging on to people once we get them in. CSU, the average tenure in CSU is about 2.5 years. So it is substantially lower than the rest of the organization. Little caveat on that number is we've only had a civilianized crime scene unit for 3 years. So it's going to be lower than the rest of the organization, but certainly turnover in crime scene is higher than it should be. And I think that is reflective of this work is eating people. We are burning people out in there with the operational tempo. We talked back in November about the 5-year plan, acknowledging we really should have a unit that probably is more like 150 people. We're currently at 28. So even if the magical money bus backed over me tomorrow and dumped enough money on us to be able to have 150 people, the reality is the group with 28, there is no earthly way we could find that many people in the nation. There is no earthly way we could find and incorporate and train and stand up that many people in the unit that quickly. We think we can do about 6 a year. So that's why the plan is built around adding 6 people, 6 CSIs a year, and the support around that. Part of that 6 is also based around, we have worked out with the National Forensic Academy to dedicate 6 seats in the training academy per year for us. So it's 2 in each of the classes that they run through the year. We estimate that sending these folks to NFA saves us at least 6 months in the training arc with them. So it is highly valuable in working that out. But it's going to take us a while before we can actually have the capacity to build in more than about 6 people a year. So within this budget, the big chunks are 6 more crime scene investigators, a supervisor to go with that, and a support staff that we would add probably in client services to help support the additional requests and paperwork and all of the things that are going to go with that. There are supplies and various services, training, things like that to support those 6 people. There is capital investment, vehicles primarily. One of the things that's in that 198,000 is what we call a command vehicle. For a city this size, it's notable that we don't have a command vehicle for the unit. We respond to some pretty significant scenes, some scenes that our CSIs are at for hours, if not days. They don't have any place that they can get out of the heat, get out of the weather, be able to store larger equipment, have a generator associated with it, things like that. So we've got that built into the capital investments for this next year. And then there also is money built in there for advancements that we are already seeing that we need to improve how we're documenting at the scene to try and make things easier and better for them. So that's the iPads and software in there to make that happen in this next year. So those are the big chunks. Questions about that so far? All right. So things that are going on right now, because yes, that is where we need to head with the budget, but it's not like we're stopping right now. And we also have things that are ongoing that will help inform how we spend that money on the other end. We sent, I think hopefully you all got, sent an update to CSU about where we're at in terms of validating the drone and the new mapping technologies that we're trying to implement. We've made pretty good progress on that. We were actually out a couple weeks ago doing a mock scene that we hired a survey team to come in and make high precision measurements of reference points within that so that we can validate within the scene that these models are doing what we expect them to. And we are targeting to start running these tools on live scenes in parallel to our current methods sometime after March 16th. The FAA has some rule changes that they're making that go into effect March 16th that make it a little easier to fly the drone, particularly over people. So that's why that March 16th date, but it also gives us time to get some of the SOPs in place, start working through, hopefully finish up analysis of some of the data that we've collected. We've collected a lot of data. I've got a spreadsheet going that has many thousands of data points in it already out of the mock scenes that we've run. So we're making good progress on that. Actually, here is some of the data from a couple of weeks ago that we ran. That's not just one photograph there. That is actually a shot from the 3D model that was created from the drone flyover from that. And basically, you're able to measure most anything in it. The stuff is looking really nice. So I think there really is the potential to have not only a better product at the other end, but a much faster, more efficient product. Questions so far? Okay. Other things we've got going on, we have launched a new Lean Six Sigma project in crime scene and have rapidly identified some things to work on with them. We expect this project to close sometime in June, but even so far, we've seen some pretty low-hanging fruit of modifying how we handle getting narcotics off of scenes. There was a pretty significant safety risk in there of our people driving away with bags of drugs in the truck. So we've worked out with HPD how we're handling that. That's all been changed. HPD officers are now the ones that are taking those drugs away from the scenes. And how also we're handling firearms evidence that helps simplify how evidence gets tagged into the property room and makes things easier for CSIs. So there's already things that are getting changed on this. We can't efficient our way out of this, basically order of magnitude kind of scale, but anything we can do to make things easier is what we're trying to pursue. Things that we've identified, but certainly we still need money to make them happen, is this issue around how are they documenting at the scene. So right now, just like with the mapping, they're there with a pencil and a piece of paper. The notes, they're taking manual notes at the scene and then having to come back to the office and transcribe those notes into the systems that then ultimately do the reporting. So the idea is to implement tools that allow them to transcribe, basically make their notes in the field, and that goes directly into those systems. So we eliminate those transcription steps for both the time and the potential errors. Retention of all of the imagery that we make is an ongoing conversation and something that we need to think about how we deal with it, because the time those systems take to move data around is impact. Just yesterday, I think we solved one of the issues with this between us and the HPD systems that makes uploading images to HPD systems much faster, which is a good thing. But we create right now about 6 terabytes of image data a year. And that's only going to get larger. So how we efficiently and effectively manage what's going to get to be very large data sets is a reality. This is part of the reason we drove things to the cloud. I do not want to try and manage petabyte storage in a closet in 500 Jefferson. That is an engineering challenge that Microsoft needs to do, not us. But right now, we probably have about 0.3 of a petabyte worth of data that we manage in the cloud. Over the coming years, we will be talking about multiple petabyte kind of storage demands. This is a lot of data. So the last 2 parts that are in the budget, one is for toxicology and one is for firearms. We have talked, I think, for 5 years about the LC triple quads. I figured it was about time you all got to see one of them. There's 3 of them. So we've got the 3 that we have been working at. I think seems like for 5 years we've been trying to get this there. But these are the LC triple quads that are in the toxicology lab. But in the budget, we know there are changing national standards, OSAC standards, that demand changes in how we go about screening samples. So there is a lease payment in there for a 4th LC triple quad that we would use in the screening of samples. And another one of those mouthful of letters that I talk about of an LC QTOF, which is a different type of mass spectral instrument that gives more data for us that, again, we need for screening and for detecting particularly some of these bizarre drugs that we're confronted with. So there's lease payments for both of those that are built into next year's budget and beyond. I think the LC triple quad is a 3-year lease and the QTOF is a 5-year lease. But those we've got to get those in place to address these standards that we know are coming down the pipe. And then the last one in there is another capital piece of equipment for firearms. Now we have it built in there for a purchase of it. I don't know yet if we can find a route to lease this. I'm not sure the manufacturer of this has any options to be able to lease it. If we can figure it out, I would probably put it on a lease. But it's $220,000. So there's a fair bit on this slide, but basically what we are seeing nationally is firearms evidence, just like latent prints, is one of those disciplines that is criticized for being marginally scientific. Depends on who you talk to, of all of the various opinions about how they do their work. But nationally, there have been a number of cases in the last year where firearms evidence has been excluded as evidence on the traditional way that firearms examiners are doing their examination. These instruments do a 3-dimensional scan of the microscopic features and then allow for more algorithmic-based functions to do some of that matching and give a more statistically based result. Kind of think, this is like the STR mix of the firearms world. These instruments are starting to come into use in casework elsewhere in the country. Department of Public Safety in Arizona has these instruments currently in casework. FBI, Division of Forensic Sciences in Virginia are all ones that now have these instruments in casework. So we're not the first one. I also know the county's laboratory recently purchased, I think, this version of the instrument. There's 2 versions out there. There's 2 manufacturers. They're currently working on validating. So in the region here, these kinds of results are going to start to be used. We are also seeing a lot more questions that lead me to think we are going to see challenges similar to what's happened elsewhere in the country here soon. So this is coming, and we need to get these types of instruments in place for firearms before those types of challenges really hit, and they're coming soon. So that's why this piece of instrumentation in here. Director Blanchett.
Is there already court precedence for accepting the 3D microscope evidence?
Yes. So nationally, there are places. So what has basically what you've seen to date is less about the statistical and algorithmic matching and more about using these instruments currently as reinforcement to the examiner's interpretation. So these data you're seeing be accepted in court, the next step will be the algorithmic matching. And we have been talking a lot with CSAFE and NIST. They have developed some algorithms around using these data to then give that statistical basis to the match. So it's coming soon. Where those algorithms are first used, we'll see yet. Idaho is another. Actually, Idaho was probably one of the first states to start using this, and it was less because of the examiner potential and more because they were struggling with the use of remote examiners because they don't have very many examiners in the state, and being able to get an examiner to be able to evaluate data from someplace else was what was driving them to use this. So they've actually been using these for a couple of years now. So there are precedents around the nation where these data are already being used in court.
Okay.
Any other questions around what's in the budget? All right. So here's what's not in the budget. These are things that wake me up at night. These are things I worry about. I'm basically already starting the conversation about these things for next year's budget cycle. I've already talked about NIBIN and firearms capacity. Firearms have gone up a lot. Donna will talk about this more a little bit later, but I worry about our capacity in firearms. I think we still need to see a little bit more data of, is this trend going to continue? The fact that violent crimes are continuing to go up already this year makes me think this trend's going to continue. But I really worry about our capacity in NIBIN and firearms. Latent prints, we've talked about latent prints a fair bit already. We still have, that is our single largest backlog. It is also the backlog that is the most stubborn. We're making pretty good progress on biology and toxicology now. Latent prints still keeps creeping its way up. What I also don't know, and part of why we're making the choice to leave this risk out there just yet, as we change CSU, it will have obvious implications for latent prints, but I'm not sure what those implications are just yet. So we've got the Lean Six Sigma project that's going on in latent prints, in part so that we have better data to be able to better target what we're going to ask for and the needs for there. So basically right now, you can see we're sinking in latent prints, but I can't give you a solid answer about what my best recommendation is for how to fix it just yet. And then I already mentioned multimedia. Demands there keep going up. It is a constant arms race. We have backlogs that have shown back up there that we had previously managed to get rid of. Again, this is a capacity issue there that I worry about. I don't know yet if this is effects of pandemic and it may subside, but there are telltales that make me think this is a trend that's going to continue. So look out for me to rant about these over the coming year as we probably set the stage for what are going to be needs in the next budget cycle. But these are current risks. We are making a choice to keep an eye on these risks, knowing that the city can only do so much, and it's going to be an active challenge there. Director Cohen?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm just curious in general about the budget. I know that we're going to be voting on it shortly, but assuming that we pass it, my question is, have all the city council members visited your site either in person or some other way?
They have not yet. We're working our way through it. And I think discussing with Councilmember Kamen, the intent is to have me go talk with safety, public safety in April.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because I think it would be very, very important for everyone to see it.
Yes.
And for them to understand it, and for you to appear before public safety and maybe with Art Acevedo, because I'm sure, a great deal of what you have in the budget ends up helping, him and his department. Yep. Because I know from my own experience that when something is put in front of us at City Council, particularly as it affects budget, if we're not aware of it, if we don't have the history, if we haven't developed a certain passion for it, very often it gets lost.
Yep.
And I mean, you are very attractive in terms of how you express things and your passion for what you're doing. And it makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. So I'm just urging that whatever we pass today, gets in front of council before it gets to the point where council is voting on a budget.
Yeah, and that's our intent. And certainly I've had lots of conversations with Andy Aiken in finance about where we're at so far. And this is a refinement from some of those conversations. But yes, that is the intent, is to try and get both individually with council members as well as to public safety before they have to vote on it.
Okay, thank you.
I was just hoping you were saying I was attractive because of the haircut. So,
Well, that goes without saying.
Any other questions I can answer? Well, thank you for your time, y'all. I appreciate it. As always, if you have questions, feel free. Always happy to answer. But Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
All right, thank you, Dr. Stout. If there are no other questions for Dr. Stout, we will move on to agenda item 9, which is a presentation by Mr. David Leach, our CFO and treasurer, regarding the proposed fiscal year 2022 budget. Members, you should have received a copy of Mr. Leach's budget presentation via email, in addition to a copy of this agenda item's executive summary in your board packets. All of you were asked to review the content in preparation for this agenda. I hope you had a chance to do that. And after Mr. Leach's presentation, we will have time for questions, discussion, and then this is where we have to do the roll call vote to approve the budget. So Mr. Leach, I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And Director Mitchell, I would ask, I'll pause after each slide, but when I share my screen, I can't see if somebody has raised their hand. So if I can just kind of funnel questions through you, because you'll be able to see if somebody's raised their hand, and I'll give a short pause.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see if this is. Do you see a PowerPoint right now, or do you see something else?
I see a PowerPoint, but not in presentation mode.
Okay,
Just
let's put it presentation mode.
There we go. Got it.
Is it big enough where you can see it? I hope.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. My name is David Leach. I am the CFO and treasurer for Houston Forensic Science Center, and I'm presenting to you for your hopeful approval in the fiscal year 22 budget for HFSC. Let me just start off. We have some newer members with a bigger picture before we go into the specifics. So we'll start at the highest level and then we'll drill down some. So fiscal year 21 forecast, each month as the numbers come in, I re-forecast the next 24 months. So since our budget is set to where we are expected to spend the full amount of our budget each year, as months pass by and actual results come in, I reproject the future the best that I can. It's a projection, so it's always wrong, but hopefully close enough to where it doesn't make a meaningful difference. So just the pieces that we look at fundamentally aren't changing much. I appreciate Dr. Stout going through in detail the incremental add that we're asking for here in a few minutes, but 68% of our costs this year are people costs. Next year, it will be 70%. That makes sense. We're asking for an increase in CSU, so there's a little bit of a change. Services are going to stay pretty much the same as a percentage of the total. Supplies, capital, interest expense. Interest expense is just a function of the long-term lease that we have on the building. That's the way that we account for that. But you can see there that really the business isn't changing fundamentally. Where we are spending the money currently and in the past functionally is staying the same. So what that should tell you is that even though we grow in size, we're growing in the same way that we are currently. People are always the largest percentage of our cost. So that's just a look at the highest level of our business. Now, let me just, all those numbers that Dr. Stout just showed you and shared with you in detailed conversation, this is what I call a waterfall chart, and it just shows you how you get from point A to point B. You see there the CSU personnel. Let's see, can you see my mouse when I move it around? So you have the CSU personnel, that's 524. You have the supplies associated with the personnel, 36, the capital that was discussed, and then the crime pad, the crime scene unit, the software and the iPads that go with that. That's all associated with the crime scene unit, and that totals $858,000. So that's an incremental add from where the revenue is that we asked for this year and are going to receive from the city, 27.2 million, right? And then we have a 3-year lease for another triple quad. That would be $84,000 in the year. You have the QTOF. That's a 5-year lease that we're looking at. That's in the year. That would be $126,000. And then you have the digital microscope for firearms. Both the triple quad and the QTOF are for toxicology, and so that would get us to what I'm going to ask you to approve in revenue from the city of 28.508 million. So that's just how we get from where we are to where we would like to be, and that's almost a $1.3 million increase year over year. Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, I'll keep going. All right, so now again, so that's the revenue side. So that's the money that we're going to ask for, and I'm going to ask you to approve. But you also need to look at the expenses. Okay, so the expenses, what I'm forecasting being spent this year is 28.9 million. Okay, there's a couple things in there that you would say, wait a second, that number is bigger than your revenue. Well, true. The reason for that is we have grant revenue each year in excess of $1 million. So we don't ask for a budget for the grant money from the city. That's on the side. And also this year, we've been approved 1.3 million of CARES money. So we have expenses this year that are being reimbursed to us just this year because of the CARES Act. So that's spending that won't happen next year. And then also any money that we had from prior years that wasn't spent goes into our beginning balance that could be spent in the current year. Because each year we're trying to, well, we can't really get to zero, but we try to get as close to zero in the bank account by the end of the year. So that's why expenses are higher than the revenue that we're asking for. But at a higher level with expenses, personnel costs in total, which would include the incremental increase of CSU and changes in personnel, you got $1.5 million increase. Supplies are basically flat. Services are going down. They're going down because you're not spending the CARES money, and the grant money that we spend there isn't included there. So that's a decrease year over year. Interest just changes a little bit. Non-capital changes a little bit. Capital spending is increasing. Again, you had the QTOF, the microscope, and the other triple quad. So that's going up incrementally year over year. And then grants are going up with the way that I'm accounting for them year over year. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. So where that would put us at the end of the year is a total spend of 30.4 or 30.5. And if I'm accurate, which I have to be because we can't run out of money with the ask, right, that I'm asking for and spending that much money, that gets us to basically a zero balance at the end of the year. Okay, so that's just trying to put it in perspective of what I'm asking. Okay, any questions?
Does that
Okay.
include
Yep.
salary increases for the employees?
Repeat the question, please.
Salary increases for employees, is that included in this budget?
Yes, ma'am, and I will show those individually.
Okay.
That's shown in the 1.488 million. The salary increases year over year, increases in payroll and health care and other payroll costs. And I have a slide for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Other questions?
No.
Okay. All right. So here's a more detail, but an opportunity for you to kind of look at the history. So if you go all the way back to 2015 through our current year forecast and the budget that I'm asking you for, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because of the information that I presented previously, and you've been able to look at it, but you can see, you know, the money that we are asking from the city is on this line, HFSC, and Fund 2213. That's just the accounting term that was chosen for the reimbursement that we get from the city for their employees. And you notice that that number has gone down over time. Right now, we're down to 7 city employees that we use. There was the City of Houston appropriation. When we used to be in their building, they had determined by a market study that the rent that we should have been paying for using their building was $1.46 million. That went away when we started leasing our own building. So we don't account for it there. That money is moved up into our number up here, right? It's not down here anymore because we're in our own building. We have our own lease. And then there are other smaller revenues that we receive, like grants. We receive, this year we're projecting to receive 1.3 million in grants. Next year, we're projecting that we will get 1.6 million in grants, and the other numbers are really immaterial. They're so small. But one thing to point out on grants is when we actually spend the money. So if I look at actual fiscal year 20, if you go down here to grant expense, the number's 0 because the money that we actually spend is included in, if it's supplies or personnel or services, the number's included in there. But when I am forecasting it, you'll see the 1.6 million up here, and you'll see the expense down here because I don't actually know where that money is going to be spent. And we talk about this quarterly when I say I ask for a reallocation of budget money, because when I originally budget that money, it's down here. And then when we actually spend it, it shows up in these line items. So I have to move it around, but that's just a function of the way we account for it. So based upon the review that you were able to do before the meeting, does anybody have any questions that you want me to try to address at this level before I go into the specifics?
No hands are raised, so
Okay, all right, we'll keep going then.
keep going, yes.
Okay, so 70% of our cost are people cost. Here you can see in total, the people cost, it went up a little bit. Remember, in the last year, we received a 1.6 million increase to devote to increasing the resources for toxicology. This year, there will be another 6 that are increased. If you look at total personnel down here, you're going from 215 to 221. Those 6 are the CSU, the increase for CSU. And you'll notice that as HFFC employees go up, there was a decrease in City of Houston or Fund 22 employees. And then the gray line just shows, you know, when you have 200 employees, you're never fully staffed. You're always looking for people. And the report that Dr. Stout just gave, you know, there's currently 10 open positions. That's just kind of the average for the year. And that's probably about where it's going to stay. You're always going to have some vacancies. So that's just a look at what drives 70% of our cost. Those are the people cost. And then also in the chart, I just show you average wage per personnel. You just take total. That's not just their wage. That's all in cost. So that includes taxes. That includes healthcare benefits and everything. You just take the total personnel costs that we have and divide by the total number of people. So there you see that. Okay, questions? Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, now to your question a few minutes ago. Here we have a waterfall chart that is total wages and benefits. This is what we're forecasting to spend this year, 19.7 million. Let me deal with the easy one first. Pay increases, which comes to about 3.5% of 790. You have the incremental increase that we're going to be asking for the 6 new CSU or the CSIs. This vacancy number, that's an estimate. Excuse me. So when I estimate the salaries, I make an assumption that we'll run at a 2% vacancy rate. So there's a dollar amount associated with that. But if we actually run at a higher rate, that's money that we're kind of saving month over month because we're not paying it in salaries. But when I ask you for a budget, I can't assume a 10% vacancy rate, because if we actually run at a 5% vacancy rate, I've got 5 people's payroll I can't pay. So I only assume in my model a 1 to a 2% vacancy rate. So there's an add there. And then so far through December, you know, I told you that grant money shows in different line items. Through December, we had received 202,000 of money reimbursed for grant employees. So that's how we get from our current forecast of 19.7 for 70% of our cost to a 21.2 million ask in the budget. Those are the incremental steps that show the year-over-year change. I'll pause for questions. Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, so now we're with services, and services, this makes up about 17% of our cost. This year, we're at 5 million. Now, 2 big negative numbers, which is unusual, but remember I told you we have 1.3 million authorized for care spending in this number over here. So, and it was done through outsourcing of toxicology, and we invested heavily in software. So that's money that was spent in the 5 million that won't be there for us next year. So there's a big decrease. So what I want you to take away from that is I don't have any increases for services just to say, hey, there's going to be 3% inflation or just to pad the budget. We are holding flat year over year, that what we spent this year to do our job is what we need to spend next year to do our job. And we're not going to get the CARES money. So it's flat. So I'm comfortable with that, but I tell you that because I don't want you to think that this budget has a bunch of fluff in it. This is my best estimate based upon analyzing the data of what is necessary to do the job next year, based upon what it cost us to do the job this year. Questions? Okay. Same concept with supplies. It's flat year over year. What we spent last year for the budget, I'm saying it's going to cost us next year. Now, there will probably be a little bit of inflation and there will probably be some changes, but we'll find a way through Lean Six Sigma or other things to absorb that cost. We're assuming year over year it's going to stay the same. Okay, capital. And Dr. Stout has gone over this, but we already have 3 LC triple quads and we're in a 3-year lease with those. So that's $308,000 that will be spent this year. We're already in contract with that. Recently, you guys approved the Rapid DNA. We're in a contract with that. That comes to almost $400,000. And then the additional items that Dr. Stout just went over, the vehicles, the 4th triple quad, a lease with that, a 5-year lease with the QTOF, and then the digital microscope. Okay, so that would come to a total capital spend of $976,000. I do not include in that the 30-year lease for the building. It's there. It's a big number. It's not going to change. We're under contract for that. If somebody wants to see the amortization schedule for the building, I can share that with you. Any questions on capital? Okay. All right, so this is what I'm asking you. This goes back to where we started. Okay, the change in the revenue is actually year over year. I'm asking for $1,287,864. That's the increase year over year. The budget amount that I'm asking you to approve. Now, this is just the budget amount that we're asking from the city. Grants are separate and the other income is separate. What we're asking you to approve to be able to present to the city is $28,508,207. And there will be a voting item on that. And the way we are getting to that is where we were this year, what they approved for us this year, the 27.22 million. And then those additional items that we talked about, Dr. Stout talked about them in detail and I went over them again. Everything else remaining the same. And then that gets you to a 28.508 million. So I'll pause here for questions before I go into a voting item. And then behind that, I gave you all the detail line by line and historical. So let me go, if I can figure out how to do it, go back to this slide and just open up the floor.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Leach? Thank you for preparing that presentation and sending it out earlier for us with the voiceover because that was very helpful. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, looks like there are no questions.
So I think we go to the voting item now.
Yes, we do. Yes, so since there's no additional questions, we're going to move on to the roll call vote to approve the $28,508,207 million HFSC budget, which is including a 1.3 million increase. Board members, I need everybody to unmute. And do we have a motion to approve the budget, the fiscal year 2022 budget as presented by Mr. Leach?
Move.
Second.
Okay, Director Cohen made the motion, Director Hilder, second. Are there any other discussion, any other questions? Okay, Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll call vote for us?
Yes, Madam Chair. Chairwoman Mitchell.
I approve.
Vice Chair Lunchke.
I approve.
Director Vasquez.
I approve.
Director Hilder.
Approve.
Director Medina.
Approve.
Director Blinset.
I approve.
Director Cohen.
Approve.
Director Moore.
Approve.
Director Huff.
Approve.
All right, the motion passes and carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item number 10 is our monthly operations report from Dr. Amy Castillo, who's Vice President and COO, including an overall review of 2020. Good morning, Dr. Castillo.
Good morning. Can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's dive into the operations report. Of course, I need to get my mouse to the right screen. So my main highlight this month is going to be talking about 2020. I know we all want to forget 2020 existed, but I just want to go over kind of where our sections ended up and what 2020 looked like for them, because I do think it's important for us to understand that as we go into 2021, especially given it doesn't seem like, New Year's Eve happened and everything got better. But I do want to highlight on this slide a couple things for this year. As you can see, we did actually see another percent decrease, or going back in the percent decrease in our backlog number in January. Why I want to point this out is one major area that we've made progress in this last month is, again, the toxicology backlogs. They actually cleared over 300 requests from their blood alcohol backlog in January. This is very exciting in that we are making really good progress on hitting our target of having that backlog cleared in June. The other place is we did clear in the month of January a little over 40 more kits from our in-house backlog. Again, not as big of a number. Those are a little more complicated to get through than blood alcohol cases, but it's still, consistently going in the right direction of getting us to where we need to be in on our backlogs in biology, and especially that sexual assault kit backlog. And I'll go a little more over those in the slides on those sections. So as I talked about, we're going to talk about 2020 in review, and I also want to give you all an update on the schedule for the ops reports for the next few months. We went over this before the holidays, but then when we didn't have a board meeting in January, so this shifted just a little bit. So today you're going to hear from Donna Udaley, the manager of firearms, about NIBIN. We've talked about NIBIN in the past, but she's going to go into a little more detail for us so we can learn about NIBIN and also the challenges that they're seeing right now. Next month, I'm going to give you an update on our backlogs in general, but I'm also going to have forensic biology present an update so they can let you know where we're at on our overall backlog plan in that section, the kits, and training. As we remember, kind of when we started talking about where we're at in biology, a lot of that is getting our training program to be more predictable and getting people signed off when we need them in order to continue growing our capacity in that section. So you'll hear from them next month. The other thing you'll hear about biology next month is we need to shift our outsourcing contracts from the one grant to another. We just received our funding for our most current federal funded grant, and we're going to shift the outsourcing to those. So we need to issue new contracts that are under those grants. So next month will be a heavy biology month. In April, I'm actually going to be out of town. So Amy Grimaldi is going to present the operations report. You've heard from her before. She's one of our Lean Six Sigma engineers. But we're also going to focus a lot on Lean Six Sigma that month. So she's currently running the Latent Prints project. They'll be in a good place to give an update on where that project is at. You also will hear from Paula Evans on our review project that you heard bits about throughout, but that project has wrapped up at this point. And so she'll give you an update on that and a brief update on where we're at with CSU. So it's actually worked out pretty well that Latent Prints and CSU are doing these projects at the same time because they do really impact each other as both of those sections are making changes. So they'll kind of talk about that in April as well. In May, we'll do a seized drugs update. We're going to talk more about seized drugs. In this presentation, we know 2020 was rough for seized drugs, especially the tail end of 2020. Thankfully, with the vaccines, we're really hopeful that we're going to be in a better place in a couple months with that section being able to be on site. And so I think an update in May will be very timely, given we may have been able to actually make some changes from where we're at now with staffing. And then in June, you'll hear from toxicology. That'll be an exciting update because that is when we should not have a blood alcohol backlog anymore. And so we'll give an update on that and how that impacts the shift of that 3-year plan to where they're going to focus on other backlogs and the tail end of that process. Do y'all have any questions about that schedule? Okay. So one of the things we did in 2020 is we updated how we're looking at our productivity goal for our company goals. If y'all recall in the past, our productivity goal was typically to decrease the backlogs, which of course we want to do, and to decrease our turnaround times. So our turnaround times are calculated when we close requests. So the issue with that goal was if we are reducing backlogs, our turnaround time should be going up because we're closing those older cases. And so when we looked at that, we realized we're really not setting ourselves up for success here by having those in the same goal. The other piece that really was being highlighted is we needed to come up with a goal that drove the right behaviors, if that makes sense. When we're looking at overall turnaround time, there's a lot in that because it's from the time that a request is received by the lab until a report goes out the door. When we have sections that are struggling with capacity, we're basically setting our analysts up to have in their goals something they can't control. So they cannot control how long it takes the section to assign that request to them. They can control how quickly we work through that assignment, how efficiently we work through it once it's assigned to them. And so we decided for our internal production goal to look at that analysis turnaround time. So what that encompasses is from the time it's assigned to an analyst to begin work till that report goes out the door. So it's more controllable by our analysts. And so we wanted to pick something that we felt like when they look at this goal every day, they can know that they can influence it versus that overall turnaround time. I will say, just, you know, as a caveat, we know that our stakeholders, our external stakeholders, they need that overall turnaround time. So clearly that is still what we're presenting on our websites and data that we present in these ops reports, because we need to balance what drives the behavior internally and what can be motivating internally with what is still critically important to our stakeholders. So as far as the analysis turnaround time, that target, our review period actually started February 1st. So I don't have much of an update on where we're at compared to our goal. I will say our last year was 24 days. Our target is 28 for this coming year. The reason it's 28 and not 24 is that included pre-pandemic. That included January through December. So you have 3 months in there prior to all of the changes we've had to make because of COVID. The other pieces we know in seized drugs, we were trying to take into account. We know the marijuana testing has been more complicated for them, which impacts how long it takes an analyst to work that case. We also know they've been getting a lot more complicated, like methamphetamine cases, where as opposed to testing 10 tablets out of a 100 tablet case, they're having to test 60. And so that's going to take longer. So we're trying to make sure when we made this goal, we were setting it up in a way that we knew we were still going to be dealing with some of those challenges into this year. The other piece of the goal was actually reducing the average age of our pending requests. And so what this is looking at is if we looked at all of the open cases that we have in the lab right now, what is the average age of those? And let's see how much we can reduce that this year. What I like about that is it makes us focus on those older cases that have come in. We clearly still need to work with our stakeholders on rushes. Like if something comes in and it's new and it's a rush for public safety, we're going to work those cases and we're going to prioritize those. But in our daily routine of assigning cases, this focuses on kind of that first in, first out theory of if somebody's been waiting for this case for this long, let's get it out the door. And so we're targeting reducing that age by 30%. So far, from the time we started measuring this in September, we've reduced it by almost 11%. And from looking at the numbers, there's a couple areas like the blood alcohol backlog, also the outsourcing in biology, that as we progress through this year are going to help us get to that 30% number. So for both of those, I do feel like at this point we're in a good place to be hitting those targets when it comes time to measure them in September.
Okay, Dr. Castillo, I'm sorry I have to interrupt. Director Cohen had to drop out for a second, and she is attempting to rejoin.
Okay, no problem. Thanks.
Sorry.
No worries. Does anybody have any questions about these? The other piece with this is we are working now to update our dashboards to contain this information so that it's in your monthly updates where we're at. One thing that we've figured, we've really come to rely heavily on the dashboards. I think y'all have seen that through the data we present, through the Lean Six Sigma projects regarding quality. And so what we've realized internally is we really need to train more people to manage those dashboards. Right now, it is reliant on myself, on Amy Grimaldi and Paula Evans. That's who manages these dashboards. And so we're using these updates as an opportunity to get some hands-on training for some staff so that we're not putting ourselves in a place where we become dependent on these dashboards and then we aren't able to maintain them if one of us is too busy. And so that's why there's been a little bit of a delay in y'all seeing this information easily in the monthly updates. Director Blanchette, did you have a question?
Yes. Does your turnaround analysis also include an equation that you were using, I think, earlier last year that took into account the training time necessary as well as the fact that it does tend to extend the turnaround time when you train more people?
when we looked at setting the goals, we took into account, were we going to gain people or not gain people? If that makes sense, right? So as we were looking at the goals and saying, what did we accomplish this year? Where do we think we're going to be at in the coming year? It was, are we gaining people? Are we losing people? Are we shifting people to other tasks? So each section could say, this is how I think that's going to impact our turnaround time in the coming year, because I have to take this if we're training, like you said, for example, I have to take this person off of casework this much of time. So it's going to impact our turnaround time. So it's not in a calculation, but it is in the conversation of determining, if I looked at the last 12 months, do I expect the same or do we expect something different because of what's going on in this section with training or with any changes that we're anticipating coming?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So now we're going to go through each section. So client services and case management, we've talked a little bit about this before. This is our section that brings all of our evidence back and forth between the property room and 500 Jefferson for our analysts to do the work. You can imagine that is not work that can be done remotely. However, we still had that section at a 50% staff reduction from April through the end of the year, except for 1 month when we thought the pandemic was getting under control and we tried to bring them back. That did not last long. So I just really want to point out here the amazing work this section has done, because if you look at the numbers, the green bar, which was 2019, versus the orange bar, which is 2020, there was only an 8% decrease in the amount of evidence that had to come back and forth between the property room and Jefferson in order for our labs to continue their work. At a 50% reduction of staff on site, that section kept up with that. They have worked really hard. And this is another area where I am so grateful for the vaccines and us getting on that list, because that is going to allow this section to come back on site. And really, they need it, because the weeks that they're on site are, I think, not great for our mental health with what they have to do to keep up with this work. And the other piece that I really want to give them kudos for is every time a lab changes their process in order to deal with a pandemic, it impacts this section and what they need to be doing for that section on a daily or weekly basis. And again, they've just managed to roll with all that this year, come up with better ways to do things to keep things going. So they've just done an exceptional job. That being said, really, really happy when they get their second vaccine, and when we can wait those few weeks and start, working on bringing them back on site, of course, with masks and everything. So that'll be a really nice day that happens. The other section that's going to be a really nice day is NC's drugs. We've talked about them throughout this tail end of the year. They also have been at 50% capacity on site since April, except for, again, 1 month we tried to bring them back. It was, I want to say, like in the early, before this new spike started happening again, and then we had to send them back out. This section, thankfully, the requests, except for 1 month, which was October, have decreased. And so they've been at 50% capacity, but the request level was down around 40% of what we normally get. So for a while, they were able to keep up with what was coming in the door. When September happened, we had a couple things. We had to shut down for Laura for a week. I know that sounds small, but when you're at 50% capacity and you're dependent on that lab, that hurts when you're that close to the line of being able to keep up. The other thing is that was the month we went live with the new marijuana testing, which we knew would be a challenge, and it has been a challenge. So that happened in September, and it was followed by that October month where we got the same number of requests we typically get. So they didn't have that reduction in the requests coming in to allow us to catch up from September. And since then, you can see the turnaround time has gone up. And this is when that backlog started developing. At the end of the year, we were at 239 backlogged requests. 83 of those are from the new marijuana testing. So there is a piece of that is related to the challenges that we've talked about. with the marijuana testing. But I want to make it clear that's not everything. Really, for this section, we need to bring them back. So that's where this vaccine is so important. And them getting, they're all on the list at this point, the people who have opted in to get it. So we're hopefully a couple months away from being able to shift to this group being back on site, which again, I think removes a lot of stress from the staff in its own way, because this is really difficult for them. This has been a section that hasn't had a backlog in years. So it's a shift in morale. It's a shift in how they're dealing with their work. That's been pretty challenging, and they're ready to be back. The good news is really in the last month or so, what we saw through September is that backlog increasing pretty steadily. In the last month or so, we've seen it plateau a little bit to where it's like, this may be where we're sitting until we bring people back. There's no guarantee of that, depending on what comes in the door. But if that holds, the good news is once we get 100% staff back on site, we actually should be able to get out of this pretty quickly. Because if we have 100% capacity and we're still at that reduced request level, it's going to help us eat away at this backlog pretty quickly. Again, that's, for all I know, February is going to end up being the same as last year, and that'll change that. But I just kind of want to throw that out there so that we're also keeping in mind, what's the right panic level of a backlog. And I think in this one, we're going to be able to fix it pretty quick once we get everybody back on site. Does anybody have any questions about seized drugs? Okay. So toxicology, this is an area where I think this year has really been quite incredible. As the pandemic happened, they were able to shift the pieces of their process that weren't paperless to be paperless really quickly. And so they've been able to pretty efficiently balance that time needed in the lab with the time that they can work at home to get reports done. And so even with everything going on, they have increased, you can see with the green bar, which is last year compared to the orange, increased their capacity for getting work done this year. The other really big thing they did this year, which y'all saw presented, was the 3-year plan. That's been really, I would say, game changing in that section for being able to understand long-term where we need to be. It's a section where, as Peter mentioned, we've been talking about those LC triple quads for years. They're finally here. And it's one of those where we really need to balance in this section how long something like that really takes to get online, but how you balance that with the priorities of clearing a blood alcohol backlog, of getting people trained. And that 3-year plan, what it's really functioning as is not necessarily dates set in stone, but we're able to see how everything's impacting each other and how we're doing against the long-term goals. An example of that, right, is we got our 5 new analysts. The initial plan was those 5 new analysts would be all trained in blood alcohol. What we saw in the 3-year plan is we're actually getting far more drug screening requests out of our blood alcohol testing than we anticipated. And so we were able to shift and say, we're going to actually train 2 of those analysts in drug screening first, so that we're setting ourselves up not to be in a bigger hole than we thought we would be when we shifted to prioritizing that drug screening testing. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm starting to work with some of the managers in other sections to come up with those same kind of plans, because you can really see how it's helping us shift as we need to. Let's see, do y'all have any questions about talks? Okay, and like I said, June is the target for the blood alcohol backlog being gone. We're very excited about that. And the plan is to have Dr. Lee present again that month so we can get a full update on that section. So in firearms, we have the firearms piece of the work, which is the comparative piece. And then we have NIBIN. So I'm not going to talk about NIBIN because you're going to hear about from Donna at the end of the board meeting. But I did want to point out with the firearms examiners, this has been another area where they have been able to do some work from home, but it is a challenge because a lot of the work they do is on scopes and those kinds of things, which clearly you're not taking home. So they have had that struggle of having the 50% capacity on site and still dealing with the incoming casework. When you look at their turnaround time, they've done a really good job of keeping that pretty steady. You saw in September, October, it went up a little bit, but the balance of that is looking at that backlog throughout this past year. So the backlog that they had in January, some of that stems from the move, because I think we tend to forget that also happened at the end of 2019, and we were recovering from it as this pandemic occurred. But you can see they really were able to keep that backlog at a steady place throughout this pandemic. And so I think that shows, even though it's been a challenge for sure, the staff have done an amazing job working through that and keeping us in a place that as we're able to come back, we don't have very much of a hole to dig out of from this past year. And like I said, you'll hear more from Donna about the NIBIN piece of this, because we have seen an increase in that work. I'm going to throw out there now, though, that section, they've done an amazing job in that area too, because even with that increase, they have kept the turnaround time below 3 days on that NIBIN work. Any questions about firearms? Okay. Okay, so then we have forensic biology. So forensic biology, as we have talked about throughout the year, has been working their backlog plan. The backlog plan involves removing the kits from the backlog, but it is a bigger plan of how do we not have a backlog in that section. It has been a challenge for us in that section as long as I have worked in the lab, which has been 10 years now. It's just a never-ending challenge. And one of the things we really do realize is in order for us to really get to a good place, we have to clear the backlog, not just the kits. And so that's where we're kind of, you know, we're using the outsourcing to help us keep the kits going while we can continually work on the entire backlog in-house. So as you can see, based on the plan, the initial projection of where we would be at with the backlog at the end of the year was 940. We ended at 901. So we're making good progress on hitting our targets that we need to hit every month in order to have the entire backlog cleared by the end of 2021. And as you can see on the kit chart, we've also made a lot of progress on the kits, especially at the end of the year. What happened there is we've been steadily working on our in-house kits. Like I said, that right now, sorry, let me find my notes because I wrote down at our high of the in-house kits this year was 371. At the end of the year, we ended at 168. And the target for those is for them to be gone by the end of April. And again, that's kind of, you'll be hearing from biology next month, so you'll hear more details about how that plan is going. But we're making really good progress on that. The other piece that we saw is we started getting the kits back from the outsourced labs. So the kits that we had sent out that we knew there was going to be a lag. And when we started getting those back, we started getting them back and getting them back, the reports out to the investigators. And so that's where you see that big dip at the end of the year of 300 kits coming out of the backlog. The other piece in biology is training. You know, we made, based on conversations that we had in the board, conversations we had internally, lessons learned, made quite a few changes to how we were running the training program for the DNA analysts. I'm happy to say that as of now, they are on target. Everything is on schedule. The changes that we have made seem to be effective in how we can plan that these analysts are going to be signed off and doing work in August. So we're really excited about that because that factors into this plan of reducing the backlog. And next month, you'll hear more about the details of that. The other piece about biology I wanted to mention was CODIS. As you know, CODIS is our database where all of our profiles get put in to determine if those profiles hit to another case or hit to potentially a convicted offender in order to give leads in cases. CODIS, a couple years ago, went through a Lean Six Sigma project and made amazing progress in their turnaround times, in the visibility of their turnaround times. And this year, I think, was a really good test of how well we're maintaining that, because they received, as you can see, especially starting in September, well, starting the whole year, but then spikes at the end of the year of how many hits and entries they were needing to deal with. And if you can see that yellow line with the turnaround time, they had 1 month that was around 20 days. Other than that, they've been at a sub 15-day turnaround time on average for dealing with those, even with that huge increase of hits that they're dealing with. The reason they saw that increase is because of our focus on the backlog, and especially reviewing the work that Outsourced Labs had done. That created a whole lot more entries, which is going to yield more hits. The other was the implementation of StarMix. So as y'all know, with StarMix, that's our software that helps us interpret more DNA. More DNA is going into CODIS. Because we can interpret more, it also means we're getting way more hits out of CODIS, even just for one profile, because more was put in, the database is still seeing potential hits, and our analysts, our CODIS analysts, have to go through each one of those and determine, was it in fact a hit or not? So that's just been a really large increase in work that they've had. Jennifer Clay, the manager of the CODIS unit, has done an amazing job keeping that section going and keeping all of those principles that they learned as part of that Lean Six Sigma project intact and keeping that section where it's at, even with that increase. So I'm just throwing kudos out there to them. Do y'all have any questions about biology? Okay. So latent prints. Latent prints is still an area of struggle for us. You can see, you know, the green lines on both of these are the number of requests we get in the door, and the orange is what we're completing. There's a gap. And until we can close that gap, it's going to be very, very difficult to address the backlog in that section. As you know, we have the Lean Six Sigma project going on. I'm very encouraged by where that project is at and how it's going. You can already see areas where we are going to be able to find efficiencies. I think the other piece is right now they're in the measure phase, which means they're gathering data. You can see that we're getting the data that we're going to need to understand what do we need in that section in order to address this issue. Beyond the Lean Six Sigma project, though, there are a couple things going on that I think will help in the meantime. One being that we have two analysts. A while ago, we had 4 vacancies, if y'all remember, and we tried a new training program where we sent the 4 examiners off to be trained, and then they just needed to come back and train on our end of things, like reporting, our SOPs, test out of modules that they have the knowledge they need. So of those 4, 2 have just been recently signed off. So that's 2 more examiners that are going to be in this capacity that aren't right now. We have another one who's doing her mock trial in a couple weeks, and then another one who should be done in April. So even with that project going on, we're still going to be increasing our capacity to some extent just by getting examiners signed back off and onto casework in that section. And the same for processing. We have 2 people in training right now. One of those people will end up replacing a processor that's going to be an examiner, but one of those is an add to our processing capacity. So typically we've had 2 processors. We're going to end up with 3. So that will also, in the meantime, while this project is going on, hopefully give us a little more capacity. Okay, and then we have multimedia. You heard from Dr. Stout some of the challenges that we have in this section. They were another section that in 2020 we had doing these 50% rotations. So they had 50% of staff on site, and they had an increase in the requests they were receiving. So you can see in digital, it increased by 9% in 2020, and AV increased by 10%. In AV, we were able to keep up. In digital, there is the formation of a backlog because we were not able to keep up with that increase with that staffing. A couple things that, you know, although I know we're not able to ask for budget to put staff in here in this section right now, there are a few things going on that we're working on. One is cross-training. As you can see, we're able to keep up at AV and not digital. And there's an effort to train some of the people that only do AV to be able to do digital. And so currently we're working on using our lessons learned in biology to make a cross-training plan in this section so that we can really understand what is it going to take to be able to get people cross-trained while dealing with an increase in casework. So we're currently working on that plan right now. The other thing is, in the past few weeks, we've been collaborating a little bit with the DA's office to understand some of their workflows, some of the challenges they also deal with the licensing on phones, so that we can kind of, I would say, use the Lean Six Sigma principle of benchmarking. Put your heads together and see, is somebody doing something that you're not that can help you with your efficiency? And so right now there's just been some conversations and getting some back and forth on different workflows and different ways maybe we can be efficient with the limitations we have of the licenses. So we'll continue those conversations so that as this year progresses, even if we're not able to add any resources to this section, we can still make some progress on being able to deal with the increase in casework. Okay, and that's my last slide. Do y'all have any questions for me? Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Castillo. All right, next we're moving on to reports and presentations by staff. Agenda item 11 is a report from Ms. Erica Zemak, Quality Director. She will include an overview of the Blind Quality Control Program and survey responses in 2020, disclosures, proficiency testing, and testimony monitoring. Good morning, Ms. Zemak.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
First, I wanted to start out with just a year in review for the Blind Quality Control Program. As you can see here, we have all of our different blind quality controls as well as verifications shown, as well as our yearly goal for each. So the total submission goal for 2020 was 576 blind quality controls. And as you can see, we met all of our goals in every one of the types of blinds that we submit, and actually exceeded that goal ever so slightly in two. The one that I'd like to point out to the board today is the latent print blind verification goal. I know that there are particular months where we are not able to identify a case that is a good candidate for blind verification. The latent print management is ultimately responsible for making that decision. But for the end of the year goal, we not only met, but actually surpassed that goal. So I wanted the board to know that they are actively working to achieve those goals, even if in a particular month they're not able to find a good candidate. And so for this year, I wanted to talk the board through our monthly submission goals and how they have changed. So just as a reminder, the way that we determine our monthly submission goals is that we take a look at the previous year's output, meaning the cases or the requests rather that are completed. And we look at the total number of requests completed, and then we try and target about 5% of those requests. Now, I want to point out for sure, to make sure that it's clear, it's not number of requests that's come in, it's cases or requests that have been completed by each section, because that is a more accurate measure of the section's capacity. So in looking at the metrics from 2020, as you can see, we've had to make two small adjustments. One is in the seized drugs section, where we decreased from submitting 15 a month down to 10. And as Dr. Castillo just walked you through, we knew that we had a decrease in requests coming in the very beginning when COVID first happened, but that section ultimately then saw an increase in those requests, and they've been working alternating schedules since the onset of COVID. So it makes sense that we see a decrease in not only the requests completed, but then subsequently our goal had to adjust. And second, for the latent print processing section, we've decreased from 2 a month to 1. And again, as Dr. Castillo just sort of outlined, we saw some struggles in that section. They have one latent print processor. That latent print processor was also doubling as a trainer for a portion of that year. And also when COVID first happened, they had a pretty big decrease in the number of cases that they were able to process, because the laboratory was, almost non-operational for a small chunk of time there. And so they've also struggled with the new working remote, on-site, off-site element to their review system. And so all that combined, ultimately, we saw a decrease in their total number of cases processed, and we've accordingly adjusted the blind quality control submission goal. Are there any questions about the year in review or about our submission goals for 2021 that I can answer? Okay. Next, I just want to talk about the number of blind quality controls submitted in January of 2021. As you can see, our new goals, our new submission goals are listed here, and we were able to meet all of our monthly goals for last month. For blind quality accomplishments and challenges, there was an article published in the Forensic Science Review Journal. It was titled Ups and Downs of a Blind Quality Program, HFSC's Perspective. And if you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at the journal yet, I'll just give you a brief overview. It touches not only on our blind quality control program, but also on our transcript review program. And it gives essentially the fundamentals of both, the foundational principles behind both and how they were set up, as well as some of the challenges that we've had in both of those programs, as well as lessons learned and future endeavors. That article was published in January of 2021. And as far as blind quality controls being discovered, I know it's been a little while since I've shared any stories with the board, so there was a couple that I thought you might find worthwhile. The first is which a multimedia blind was discovered. And as you know, when a staff member correctly discovers a blind, meaning they're correct when they make their guess that the case that they are working is in fact a blind, when they are correct, they are then gifted with a Starbucks gift card. But one of the caveats of getting that gift card is that they have to divulge to the quality division what it was about that case that tipped them off to the fact that it was in fact a blind. And so when we asked the multimedia analyst, he responded that his first clue was how tidy the request was. He then went on to say that HPD doesn't always make it quite that easy. So again, it's one of those stories where the quality division is creating requests in a way that perhaps don't truly mimic casework, in the sense that when we're creating these cases, the organization is a bit too nicely put together, I would say. He went on to say that HPD unfortunately doesn't always fully complete the request form. And of course, if you've ever met somebody from the quality division, we fully complete our request forms. And so again, just the idea that, you know, the fact that we were too neat was actually ended up being a red flag or a tell for this analyst. We next had a blind discovered from the forensic biology section, and this one was a little bit different. In this particular blind, the analyst was familiar with the particular investigator that we used in order to submit the blind, and the analyst was able to tell something about the writing or the information that was conveyed in the case information wasn't in line with how that investigator typically writes or their style of writing. And so I would say, you know, two opposite ends of the spectrum on this one, right? In this one, not only do we have to step up our game, but we need to start tailoring our requests very specifically to the investigator that we are using to make our submission. But of course, the quality division is up for the challenge. And also the forensic biology analyst, because she was correct, was rewarded with a Starbucks gift card. And the last one that was discovered that I want to share with the board was in the firearms section. And this firearms blind was discovered because while the item of evidence was submitted as bullet fragments, they were actually, in fact, intact full bullets. And so the firearms examiner saw this as a red flag. He sort of thought of it as maybe like a rookie mistake, that an investigator wouldn't refer to a full bullet as a bullet fragment. And so it was enough for him to have a suspicion. And in fact, he was correct, and a Starbucks gift card went his way. But I also wanted to share with the board this month that there was someone who got it wrong. meaning they incorrectly identified a real case as being a blind. And this is the picture of him right here. He is providing $1 to Dr. Stout because he was incorrect. And that's the deal, right? That's the agreement that we have with staff, that if they are correct in identifying a blind, they get a Starbucks gift card. But if they are incorrect, then they in fact owe Dr. Stout $1. And this is a picture of the latent print examiner handing over his $1 to Dr. Stout. And of course, we asked him, what was it about that case that made him think it was a blind, even though it wasn't? And he stated that based on his experience, he was working a burglary case. And typically when a burglary case comes in and there's currency involved in the case, he's used to seeing large amounts of money. And in this particular case, there was only $1 in the case. And so he found that to be rather strange. He noticed another packaging discrepancy that he's not used to seeing. And those two things combined made him venture a guess that it was a blind. And I don't mean to pick on him by any stretch of the imagination, but this latent print processor happens to be pretty astute in identifying blinds. And so every once in a while when he gets one wrong, the quality division likes to sort of celebrate and pat ourselves on the back that, you know, he was wrong once and that he didn't actually detect a blind this time. But we genuinely appreciate his very keen observations. Are there any questions that I can answer about the blind program before I move on? Okay, I wanted to give the board an update on our disclosures and complaints. As the board knows, we had a disclosure from our latent print section that was presented to the Texas Forensic Science Commission and was included on their January agenda. The commission voted no further actions needed, meaning that the commission agreed that HFSC had done everything necessary in order to resolve this nonconformance. Just as a reminder, this did not raise any questions about the reliability of our latent print exams, or comparisons, or identifications, but the disclosure itself centered around documentation. And just again, as a reminder, all told, we had the quality division oversaw an audit of 95 cases from the technical reviewer involved in this disclosure, and we were able to demonstrate the effectiveness of this reviewer. The original analyst was removed from casework and retrained, and the initial case was reassigned to a supervisor and an amended report was issued. Are there any questions that I can answer about our latent print disclosure? Okay, I wanted to let the board know that we received a complaint in the forensic biology section that is quality related, and at this time, it is unsubstantiated. This complaint focuses on the screening process of the forensic biology section. And so I just want to kind of outline for the board, what do I mean by the screening process? And so when an item of evidence comes into the laboratory for the forensic biology section, it is either an item where we're looking for contact DNA or touch DNA, and that item is essentially swabbed or a cutting is taken, and that is submitted on for DNA analysis, an attempt to generate a DNA profile. The other route that an item can take is that it is screened for the potential of a biological fluid. And so if it screens positive, meaning there is the possible presence of a biological fluid, either blood or let's say semen, again, that item of evidence then moves forward onto the DNA analysis process in an attempt to generate a DNA profile. Now, if a DNA profile ultimately isn't generated, there is a point in time where the onus is on that report writer to think through that information, right? Does that make sense? Was there not enough DNA in that sample to ultimately lead to a profile or develop a DNA profile? Or should there be some attempt at retesting, right? Should we take this item of evidence through the processes again, because we want to make sure that that answer ultimately makes sense at the end of the day. But this complaint focuses on items of evidence that are screened to be negative, meaning they tested negative for the presumptive presence of a biological fluid. And once that happens, that's it. The analysis essentially ceases. It doesn't proceed on for DNA analysis. And so this complaint has kind of given us an opportunity to really focus on our screening process workflow as it pertains to those negative cases, and think through the amount of risk that's involved in those negative cases. And I say that I don't mean, that suddenly we've had this realization, because that's not the case at all. What I mean rather is, historically, through not only our laboratory, but through all of forensic science, right? Other laboratories throughout the forensic community, our efforts and our focus have really been on that false positive that's always been seen as the bigger risk, and respectfully so, right? But the idea of affiliating a known individual with an item of evidence when they shouldn't be has always been historically where we have concentrated a lot of our time and energy and focus in making sure that that doesn't happen, right? Preventing that from happening. But now this complaint has sort of opened up the conversation of, do we need to reevaluate the risk in a negative item, a false negative, in fact, and determine, do we have the appropriate controls in place for that? And so in the forensic biology section, we've already made some process improvements, and it's still an ongoing conversation. There may be more appropriate process improvements to be made. But really, the conversation extends beyond just the forensic biology laboratory and into all of our technical sections, in the sense that, again, our focus has always been on those false positives. We've been aware of the false negatives. We've been aware of the amount of risk that's affiliated with those false negatives, but now sort of taking some time and ultimately reevaluating those risks and putting process improvements in place to mitigate them as necessary. And so, in order to fully resolve the forensic biology complaint, we're going to do an audit of previous casework, and we're going to target those negative cases. And so we've reached out to the Harris County District Attorney's Office. We have made them aware of our intent to perform this audit, and we have asked them for their input as to our case selection process. And so that's where we are right now. We are in our case selection process, and once that case selection process has finished, we will be in a position where we'll be able to start recalling evidence and starting that re-examination process. And I don't expect this to be an overnight process, right? This is going to take a little bit of time. And so I'm saying that to the board in the sense of, I will keep you involved and updated about the progress that we make and the outcome of the audit that we perform at regular intervals throughout the entire process. Are there any questions that I can answer about the forensic biology complaint?
Yes, it looks like Director Cohen has a question.
Yes.
Yes, I'm just curious, not by name, but by position, who makes the complaint?
Do you mean in general or this specific complaint?
No, well, either. I mean, probably in this case, we're talking about a particular case. So who in this case? Is it, is it an individual? Is it a company? I'm just interested.
Sure, yeah, perfect question. So just to answer a big picture, right, we have a complaint survey that is on our website, so that complaints can come into our office via that website or via any member of our entire organization. This complaint specifically was made from a previous employee who reached out to a current employee in order to initiate the complaint process.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions that I can answer?
It looks like Director Blanchett has a question.
Yeah.
I realize you haven't gone through the selection process yet, but do you have a rough idea about how many cases you think will have to be reevaluated?
Sure, that's a great question. So what we'd like to do ideally is have a statistically significant number of cases that we want to look at. So when we start crunching those numbers, we're looking at anywhere between roughly 150 cases to 175, somewhere around there. But of course, you know, number one, that takes into account, sorry, I should stop. Let me back up. So anywhere between like 150 and 175 cases, I should say. Right now, we're looking to target about 15% of casework from each one of our analysts. That's what we're thinking as a whole. But we have to balance the section's capacity with also the needs of this complaint and ultimately the goal of what we're trying to do with this audit. So I throw that out there concept-wise, but it's obviously subject to change as we go along. And of course, if we have reason to need to look at more cases, we will do that as well.
Okay, you kind of touching on the follow-up question I had is that we had already gone over earlier about the turnaround times and how they're taking into account things where people are taking off their regular casework to do other things. And this is one of those other things I'm hearing.
Right.
So I presume then when Amy talked about the turnaround time, this was taken into account, the auditing activity?
I think, is that more of a question for Dr. Castillo?
I guess it is. Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
Hi. At this point, we haven't, but I will say where this auditing activity needs to occur in the biology process is thankfully where we don't have bottlenecks. Currently, this part of the process has about a 6-day turnaround time. So we're fortunate from that perspective. If this was going to require DNA analysts to be pulled in to do this audit, then absolutely we would need to take that into account with the goal. I do feel like I don't want to say we have capacity because we don't for this kind of thing. This is always additional in addition to what we're doing. It's just that part of the process right now is not a bottleneck for us.
Okay.
And I will add on to that part of the process is also being in constant communication with forensic biology management and just making sure that we're not dumping some number of cases on them in one day, right? But rather talking to them about what their capacity is and what the flow of this audit should look like in a way that doesn't inundate them, but works with their works around their capacity essentially.
So did you have a deadline which you wanted to complete the survey? I don't know if you said it or not. I'm
sorry, complete the survey?
Yeah, the audit, excuse me. Yeah.
Oh, well, at this point in time, I don't have a firm deadline. No, I think it's probably going to take a number of months. Honestly, I think that 6 months is probably enough to say that we're factoring in some room on both sides for case selection process and constant communication. I'm hoping we can get it done in less than 6 months, to be honest, but that would be my thought process going in at this point anyway. Okay.
I was just wanting to get a sense for whether or not you felt like there was an absolute deadline that had to be completed for regulatory purposes or other reasons. And if there wasn't one, it was a little bit of a slack that you could take in case the caseload started to pick up again.
Yeah, well, there isn't a firm deadline that we're bound to, but of course, we always want quality to be a priority, right? And it's always a constant struggle trying to find that goal. But I mean, ultimately, as things come up, we can make adjustments as necessary. But from my perspective, this needs to be one of our main priorities.
Okay. All right, sounds good.
Are there any other questions that I can answer about the forensic biology complaint?
Yes, I had one, Erica. I assume what's the budget impact? Because we have to kind of take somebody, or are we going to be funneling this into the regular casework, or how is that going to look? Because if this is going to take a while and we've got, 100+ cases we're going to basically redo,
right.
That's going to impact, time, money, et cetera, supplies, all of those costs and all.
Right. That's a great question, Stacy. So as far as hard costs go, is with actual supplies and stuff, I don't have numbers for you there. But to answer your question, we are going to filter this in just through with with regular casework.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions I can answer about the forensic biology complaint? Okay. Next, I wanted to just give the board a year in review for the survey responses. As you recall, we added that link to the survey to our emails back in February of 2020. And I know that I provided this slide in last month's board packet, but I wanted to present it again in case the board had any questions about it. And I also wanted to share a survey that we received in the fourth quarter of last year with the board. And so the survey that we received was from an investigator, and his survey his response from the onset was dissatisfied, and it was specifically with the multimedia section and their call out response. So just to give you an idea, when I say their call out response, I'm referring to the fact that when necessary, the Houston Police Department contacts the multimedia section and asks for a multimedia analyst to come to a scene to help secure video from either a security system or a DVR of sorts. And so while ultimately it started out as negative feedback, it's really ended up with a positive outcome because it highlighted that there was miscommunication going on not only within the multimedia section, but also from the multimedia section externally to Houston Police Department and their customers, or rather their customer, regarding the call out process. So just to give you some kind of an idea of what I'm talking about here, back in 2018, the Houston Police Department crafted what's known as a circular. It's essentially a memo that outlines all of the criteria that need to be in place on the Houston Police Department side prior to them reaching out to multimedia and requesting an analyst to come on site to a scene. And what we realized throughout this complaint was, although it was created in 2018 and circulated to all of the Houston Police Department at that time, it had since not been recirculated, and the investigators involved in this survey ultimately were unaware of it. And so that kind of highlighted, it extended well beyond just these investigators, but rather provided an opportunity for us to realize that we needed to, number one, recirculate it. Number two, realize that it needed to be part of the conversations that we were having with the Houston Police Department so that they understood we were asking certain questions and we had certain criteria, but that these criteria were agreed upon with the Houston Police Department, even if the officer that we were communicating with specifically wasn't aware of it. And what we also realized was that information on that circular, specifically the contact information for the multimedia section, was outdated. So we had an opportunity to not only revise that, but also had confirmation that it was now recirculated again, the revised version, recirculated again throughout all of the Houston Police Department. And so we're very appreciative of this survey because without it, I think frustrations would have just been mounting, not only within the multimedia section, but also with our customer, right, the Houston Police Department. And it was only through this survey that we were able to identify that there was a pain point here that we really needed to spend some time on and re-educate everyone around. So again, I think that this adding this survey to our email tagline and having it on our website has really shown to be an effective way of capturing feedback from our stakeholders. Are there any questions that I can answer regarding our survey responses? Okay. Here is a graphical depiction of our proficiency testing so far for 2021. As you can imagine, the year has just started, so there's not a lot going on with this graph. But here is the same for last year, 2020, and all of the proficiency testing that we underwent throughout that year. And if the board recalls, we had non-expected results obtained in one of our external proficiency tests for one of our crime scene investigators. This test centered around that presumptive test for the presence of blood. Again, a little bit similar to what I talked about, or I take that back, very similar to what I talked about in the forensic biology complaint, in the sense of, it centers around whether or not this test yields a positive result or a negative result. And if it is a positive result, then the item that is being tested is then collected from a scene and then has the potential of being analyzed in the DNA laboratory. But ultimately, if that test is negative, it is then not collected from the scene, and any potential for analysis is then stopped, essentially. So just as a reminder, the external proficiency test that the crime scene investigator took had 6 samples altogether, and 3 of them were reported as being negative when they should have in fact been positive. And I know that I spoke to the board in a previous board meeting about there being some chemical foaming that was going on, meaning when this test was performed, it was yielding a chemical reaction that was out of the ordinary. And we were able to take that entire lot of this chemical and remove it from service, but then also then replace it, obviously, and provide fresh chemical reagents to all of the CSIs. But in the course of our investigation, we had the crime scene investigator perform a second proficiency test, an internally created proficiency test. And he reported the incorrect results for one of the items on that proficiency test. Again, that item should have been positive, but it was reported as negative. And there is no evidence that the foaming affected this particular proficiency test or these specific results. And so we did an audit of this crime scene investigator's previous cases, and we recognized, or identified rather, one case that could have been potentially impacted. Now, of course, it's impossible to know whether or not it was or it wasn't, but there were 3 items of evidence in this case that were reported as being negative for this presumptive test. And ultimately, because they were negative, they were not collected from that scene. And so we identified that case and the risk involved with that case, and we contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office and made them aware. We have provided them with our final report of our quality investigation so that they have it, and ultimately will be able to determine whether or not they feel as though the case was impacted one way or another. But this CSI has since now passed a competency test for this specific presumptive test and will be reauthorized to perform that test on casework. Are there any questions that I can answer regarding this corrective action? Okay. And here I wanted to show the board a year in review for the transcript review project, but it's actually extended beyond just 2020, and it's a glimpse overall of the entire project thus far. As you can see, the project started in 2018, and all told, we have reviewed 59 transcripts as part of the project. And the graph on the right shows those 59 transcripts, but broken down per section. Biology has the highest number of transcripts reviewed at 18, and that makes sense because the biology section testified the most over the last 3 years, overwhelmingly the most. And so there you can also see the breakdown of the other sections. Now, when I look at this graph, some things that stand out to me is that we've only had 2 toxicology transcript reviews and 3 latent print reviews. These are places where we're hopeful that we will get some more transcripts so that we can review them. And if we identify any other very strong transcripts, we can share them with staff so that we can create a learning moment or a teaching moment for the entire company. And lastly, we have the 2020 and 2021 testimony data. All told, in 2020, 25 analysts testified, and all were monitored by a technical expert in their field. We have not had any, or we did not have any testimonies for January of 2021. I mean, all told, that's not a huge surprise. The court system is just starting to slowly open back up, and we're anticipating seeing an increase in testimonies as the year progresses. And lastly, for the transcript review project, the 3 transcripts that were received in the last round of reviews for 2020 have all been completed, and we are now gearing up to make our first round of requests for 2021. Are there any questions that I can answer about testimony or the transcript review project? Okay. And lastly, we have the detailed data. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 12. We have a report from Ms. Karina Haynes, Acting Director of the Crime Scene Unit, regarding CSU's training program, steps being taken to increase the unit's final report turnaround time, and a quality initiative. Good morning.
Good morning. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just to start out, who am I? My name is Karina Haynes, and I am a certified senior crime scene analyst through the International Association of Identification. I started my career in Durham, North Carolina in 2009. I started there with the Durham Police Department as a crime scene investigator and worked my way up. By the time that I left in late 2016, I was the acting unit or crime scene unit supervisor, where I supervised roughly 16 crime scene investigators in the city. We responded to a wide range of calls, ranging from property crimes all the way up to persons crimes, to include homicides and officer-involved shootings. We had a fairly steady crime rate while I worked in Durham, nothing like Houston, but I gained a lot of experience while I was there. I moved out to Houston and became the first civilian supervisor for the crime scene unit in January of 2017. I've been with the unit through Harvey. I helped train the CSIs in our first CSI Academy, and have been involved in a lot of the major changes that the unit's gone through since 2017. Prior to transitioning over to this acting role, I was the administrative supervisor for the unit, which meant I was responsible for overseeing the field training officers as they were training new CSIs. I also interacted a lot with quality, working on our workflows and coming up with policies and procedures to make the unit more effective and efficient. And I also acted in a supervisory role on scene. I responded to scene callouts and often went out to officer-involved shootings or more major scenes. One of the things that I would like to continue to do while I'm in this role is continue to build a team of competent CSIs that are able to efficiently manage our high call volume and produce consistent quality results. Dr. Stout touched upon this a little bit. Our January numbers were actually slightly lower than our January 2020 numbers. It did not feel like that as a unit. One of the main reasons it didn't feel like our numbers dipped down a little bit because with our death investigations and officer-involved shootings, you'll see that we actually had a slight increase in those calls. Our homicide numbers stayed roughly the same. We only had one less homicide in January 2021 that we did in January 2020. And our VEB calls were the same way. We only had one less vehicle in 21 than we did in 20. The calls where we increased or stayed at roughly the same rate of calls are ones that we spend the most amount of time on. Homicides take up a large portion of our time on scenes, officer-involved shootings, and our vehicles at the VEB typically take between 4 to 5 hours to process on the average end. We do have some vehicles that take multiple days in a row to get processed. So even though it looks like there's a dip in the numbers, it didn't feel like that as a unit. Right now, our current personnel, we have 4 supervisors, all of which are very new. We have 19 independent CSIs that are able to respond to scenes on their own, and we've got 9 CSIs in training. It's a total of 32 overall CSIs. However, we really only have 19 that are responding regularly out to scene work. Our supervisors do respond out to scenes, but they act more in a supervisory role. They're not taking scenes on their own unless we don't have enough CSIs to be working in the field. Of our 9 trainees, we've got 3 trainees that should be authorized for independent casework by mid-February, meaning they will tick up into that, the number there with the 19, so that'll put us at 22 CSIs. Those CSIs were the first 3 CSIs that we sent to the National Forensic Academy in Tennessee. They began their session there at the end of June, and they concluded their session at the end, or excuse me, at the beginning of September. So it's taken roughly 4 to 5, or now 5 months to get them through the training process. And they should, like I said, we are working on their final memos now, and they will be independent CSIs here in the next week or so. We have 2 CSIs that are going to begin their supervised casework out at the VEB. Those two CSIs were the ones that went to NFA session 53. Their NFA session began in mid-September, and they came back right before Thanksgiving. Their training actually was delayed just a little bit because when they came back, it was right before the Thanksgiving holiday. They had to do some pandemic-related quarantining that took a little bit of their time, and then after Thanksgiving, we ran right into another holiday season with Christmas, and so there was a lot of time off, and their training started off a little bit slow, but it's picking right back up, so they should be on the same path of their previous, to match the previous trainees that came from the NFA, and they should be released for independent casework on that 5-month training schedule. On January 19th, we received 2 additional CSIs with previous experience. One is coming to us from Utah, and the second is coming to us from Florida. They are currently working on competency testing. One of the nice things about bringing CSIs with previous experience is they get to bring their know-how from other states or other cities, and they have a basic knowledge of how to do the job. All they need to do is become versed in HFSC's policies and procedures, and that is what we're working on with those guys right now. We currently have 2 trainees who are at the National Forensic Academy and are scheduled to be back in Houston mid-March, where they will begin their training with us. And then we are actually sending another 2 out to the NFA Academy. I believe they go at the end of March. So we've got another 2 that we have hired and are scheduled to come to Houston for just a few weeks, and then they will head out to Tennessee to begin their training there. Are there any questions about personnel? So, like Dr. Stouts talked about, like you can see with our numbers, we don't have a lot of control over the scene call-outs that we get. We don't have a lot of control about when those come out. So one of the things that we are actively looking to do to help build our staff morale is look at the items that we do have control over. One of the things that we do have control over is our schedule. Last year, we moved to a schedule that had varying days off that, to be 100% honest, was difficult to keep up with, but it was done out of necessity to ensure that we deliver 24/7 service to the city. It was February 6th, we moved to a new schedule that allows for more consistent days off where they're easily able to be tracked. This new schedule for the CSIs also has an overlap day on Thursdays where all the CSIs for any given shift are in the office on Thursday. And that allows for better communication because we are able to sit down and have regular meeting briefings. On our previous schedule, we weren't able to do that because we never had one day where all of the CSIs from any given shift were in the office. It also makes it easier for supervision and management to keep track of who is supposed to be in the office when, and it gives the CSIs a regular schedule of weekends off. They have 1 month of weekends off, and then they work 1 month of weekends. It should be noted that this schedule was one that was brought to us by the CSIs. It was one that they said that they wanted to move to. So in listening to their concerns about the previous schedule with the new CSIs that we've added on, as a management team, we decided it would be a healthy move to go ahead and move the unit to this new schedule. So it was easier to keep up with. The CSIs would be a little bit happier with the schedule that they were working, and we are still providing that 24/7 coverage for the city. Something else that we're doing to help build staff morale is we are allowing the staff to move cubicles. So we have had some transition in the unit and some staff have left, and we have not allowed the CSIs to move around cubicles because there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot in the background with IT and just computer needs and that kind of thing. So at the beginning of the year, we decided that we were going to allow the CSIs to move because a change of scenery always makes things a little bit better. The 15th floor here at Jefferson has some really high real estate cubicles with the window seats, and a lot of the CSIs wanted to move to those. So we allowed the CSIs to bid by seniority on which cubicle they wanted to move to, and we are currently in the process of moving those cubes around, just again to switch it up so they can have something different to look at to make it feel like a fresh start. We also have almost all of our trucks now in service. The CSIs have mentioned they really enjoy working with these. There was a little apprehension when we first got them because they are bigger than the Suburbans that we were driving. But one of the nice things about these trucks is they are outfitted in a way that they are consistent. So if you drive one truck, if you go to another truck, you're going to find paper bags in that same spot in the truck. You're going to find the swabs in the same box or in the same area. You're going to find plastic bags or whatever you need for scene processing. You're going to find it in the same area in each truck. And it sounds very simple, but when you're on scene and you're having to process a lot of things, there's a lot of chaos going on, you're in a high stress environment, going to a vehicle and not being able to find what you need actually adds additional stress to what you're doing. So something as simple as having all of the trucks organized, just a new vehicle driving, one that's reliable, that you don't have to worry about breaking down, takes away some of the stress from just going out to these scenes. We've outfitted them in such a way too that they are accessible for all of the CSIs. I'm a little bit taller. It's easy for me to pull down the back hatch of that vehicle. For those that are a little bit shorter, we actually have straps that are installed so they can easily pull down the back hatch. We have step stools that are in the vehicle, so if it's more difficult for you to reach in and get something out of the back, we're making sure that we've kind of checked off all the boxes to make sure that they are usable for everyone. Also mentioned previously was our Lean Six Sigma project, where we're looking right now at ways to make the unit more efficient and just to streamline some of the processes that we were doing before. Again, some of our processes that we have been doing were done out of necessity. They were done because we didn't have the staff that we needed to actually, complete, evidence processing, or we didn't have the staff needed to get through some of our ARTR reviews or our administrative and technical reviews. And we're going back now, we've surveyed the unit and we're looking at ways that we can make it more efficient. What can we do now that we have more staff in place to make things easier for them? Part of this project too is so they know that their voices are being heard. We want them to know that when they communicate with us that we are listening, that we have a vested interest in what is going to make things easier when they come to work. Again, we don't have control of the scenes that we're going to, but we do have control of the way that we process these scenes. We do have control of what is required when they get back from the scenes. And we want the staff to know that we honestly care about their opinions when it comes to how these processes are done. At the end of the day, they're the ones doing them day in and day out, and whatever is going to be more efficient and effective for them while meeting the needs of the city is what we're going to do. Any questions about that? Something else that we don't want to slip between the cracks are our supervisors. Like I said, we've got 4 new supervisors, and while we are focusing a lot on what the CSI needs and what they need for scenes, we also want to make sure that we are focusing on what the supervisors need, and we want to make sure that we are training them in a way that they are confident and that they are able to go out into the field and train and instruct these CSIs in a way that's going to be beneficial for all parties. Given that they are so new, one of the things that I wanted to focus on was making sure that they understand our quality process and why it's in place. I have tasked them with putting together a quality presentation for the unit, and this quality presentation is twofold. I've tasked them with going back and looking at all the closed corrective action reports from 2020. In those closed corrective action reports, I want them to take a look and say, okay, which ones had large policy changes for the unit, and why did we make those policy changes? In doing this, it helps them to research the quality workflow, how we come to a root cause analysis, how we work with quality to reach, or not root cause analysis, but how we reach that root cause, and how do we work with quality to find out what that root cause is. Also, it helps them to kind of understand the why behind some of the policies. When the policies are put into place, we do explain the why to the unit, but with all the hustle and bustle of the daily, back and forth with calls, the stress of everything else that's going on, sometimes that why is forgotten. And this project will help the supervisors realize how we got to that why and be able to explain it to the CSIs. We are also working to reduce the turnaround time on our reports. We're bottlenecked right now. And one of the reasons that our report turnaround time has bottlenecked is because we've had 2 supervisors who were completing those reviews. And when you think about, you have 2 supervisors for a unit of over 25 CSIs, that's a lot of reports for them to get through. Right now we are training our new supervisors on how that review process works, what they need to look for, and how to communicate the feedback that's needed to the CSIs when changes are needed to their reports. I do want to make note that although it takes an extended time for our reports to get out the door, HPD detectives or officers are receiving the information that they need in a timely manner. Oftentimes, any information that they need from CSIs can be collected right there on scene, and we're able to communicate that with them. We also create an evidence list of everything that is collected from that scene, and that is emailed over to them within the day of the scene processing, so they know what evidence items were collected and what items they have available to submit to the lab. And the supervisors and myself often have communication with the detectives about what items would be most probative for their cases. They call a lot saying, I noticed that there were 10 swabs collected from a vehicle. Where were these items collected? So although it takes a little bit of time for our reports to get out the door, HPD is receiving the information that they need when they need it. There have been instances where they needed the report for grand jury, or the DA was requesting it. And when those instances occur, we are able to actually pull the report and go ahead and get that review done if it's something where they need it immediately. I've also I made it very clear about what my expectations are for report review. The supervisors are tasked with a variety of things that include not only review, but they're responsible for responding out to scenes. They're responsible for responding out to the VEB. They are responsible for daily kind of chores around the office, making sure that items are stocked and that they are ordered in a timely manner to make sure the CSIs have what they need. So I've set clear expectations about how much of their time should be spent doing reports, how much of their time should be spent on their team and the development of their team, and how much time should be spent on some of these extra projects that they are assigned. We've also established a more equitable on-call schedule for the supervisors that allow for more rest days. With our previous schedule, they were rotating a lot. Our on-call schedule made it so the supervisors often had the phone when they were off work. I use off very loosely, off work, or times when they were supposed to be resting. So sometimes a night shift supervisor would be responsible for having the on-call phone during the day, which makes it hard to sleep. And so now they have a more equitable schedule that allows them to have true off days where they're not responsible for answering the phone. I've stressed the importance of not answering emails so they can actually rest. Allowing them to rest more, it benefits in the long run. When they come to work, they're not as stressed out. They know what is expected of them. And so when they know that they are meeting their expectations, they are just a more confident supervisor overall. Also, with adding more supervisors on board, they have more time to spend with CSIs. And so if you got more time to be out in the field with the CSIs, there's additional time for learning and less opportunity for mistakes. One last thing with our supervisors, we do have 4 supervisors, but we only have 3 shifts. Of the 3 shifts, we have 3 squad supervisors, and we've made 1 supervisor a training supervisor. She is responsible for all of these new trainees that we have coming in, and responsible for making sure that they're getting through the training program in a timely manner. Previously, these supervisors were responsible for keeping up with the field training officers and keeping up with the field training program. And again, it was just something else added to their plate. So we took a look at the responsibilities that each supervisor had, and we said, okay, well, let's have 3 shift supervisors and then 1 supervisor who's responsible for the trainees. And the trainees on their own right now are a shift of their own, but by devoting 1 supervisor to them, it helps their training process go a little bit faster. And that's what we need. We need more CSIs in the field, but we want to make sure that they are trained and that they are competent and they know all of our policies and procedures. So there's not a lot that we have control over, but we are really trying to focus on what we do have control over to make sure that the supervisors feel the support that they need and the CSIs also feel the support and know that they're being heard by us as a management team. Are there any questions? Did I cut out? Okay.
I just have a comment. I think you're doing a really good job trying to keep the morale up, and I understand any of the small items like you're talking about do add up. So I hope your team appreciates it.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Karina. Great job. We appreciate all of the time and effort, and it sounds like things are going really, really well with CSU.
Thanks.
All right, if there's no other questions, we will go down to agenda item 13, which is a presentation from Ms. Donna Udaly, our manager of the firearms section. She will present information regarding an increase in requests to enter images into the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, or NIBIN, and the impacts to the system. So Ms. Udaly, welcome, and thank you for being the rounding us out on our agenda today.
Thank you. Give me a moment here to get everything settled. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hello, my name is Donna Udaly. I've never presented before the board before, so here we go. Just to give you a little bit of background about me, I was born and raised here in Houston. I earned my Bachelor of Science in Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences from Texas A&M University. What that has to do with firearms is absolutely nothing, but that's okay. I started with the lab in the summer of 2002 in what was referred to at the time as the Centralized Evidence Receiving Section. It was mainly the narcotics intake part of the laboratory, and it's now part of the property room, but that's where I started. At the very end of 2004, so like December of 2004, so about 16 years ago, I joined the firearms section. I started as a firearms examiner trainee, and my main duties at the time were to be a NIBIN technician, a gun technician, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And then I became a firearms examiner in mid-2007, so over 13 years ago. Then I promoted to the supervisor level in 2013, and then I became the manager in like September of 2017. So a little over 3 years ago. You heard Amy mention before about the 2 services that we do in the firearms section, the NIBIN part and the firearms comparison part. And so again, today what I'm going to talk about is the NIBIN part. So why am I presenting to you today? you've heard a lot about the increase in crime, not just in Houston, but all over the country. And of course, the increase specifically in violent crime and crime guns that has occurred in 2020. And so what we're looking at here is February of 2019 through December of 2020. I picked February because that's when we switched to the new LIMS system. So it's much easier to focus on that than before we switched to the new LIMS. And you can see that there's a stair step to the number of guns that we get each month. It's not steady, but there's been a significant increase overall in the number of guns that we've seen month to month between February of 2019 and December of 2020. So you can see here in like September, that was our biggest peak, and that was 500. And then in December, we hit over 600. So that's a significant increase from the 261 that was February of 2019. So I'm going to back up a little bit and give you some of the basics of NIBIN. Like, what is it? So NIBIN stands for the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, or NIBIN. You'll hear firearms examiners here in the U.S. use NIBIN and IBIS interchangeably. They're not quite synonymous, but we use them like they are. But IBIS is actually the imaging technology. It stands for Integrated Ballistic Identification Systems. So you use IBIS to put images into NIBIN, the network. So the network is run by the ATF here in the US. So NIBIN is only accessible in the United States. IBIS is actually an international technology, and other countries use IBIS with different networks. So US NIBIN partners use IBIS to image cartridge cases and bullets from crime scenes and crime guns into NIBIN. Then the system uses an algorithm that searches for and returns the closest candidates that could be a match. So these are either crime to crime or crime to crime gun. But a trained individual has to actually look through those results that we call correlations and determine if in that list, and there could be hundreds and hundreds of results in that list of correlations, a trained person has to go through and look at each individual one. Well, not each individual one. The ATF requires you look at the top 30. We look at the top 50. So we look at those top 50 and see if in that top 50 potential matches, there are actually matches that we want to issue a lead on. So the requirement to issue a lead, which would be the last step, is that if you think that when an examiner actually examines those two items under the microscope, they would say identification. We're not saying identification, we're saying it's a lead, and if they want us to actually compare them to confirm that lead, they would need to make a request, and firearms examiners would actually have to look at those items under the microscope to say identification or elimination or inconclusive. So the ATF has lined out some minimum required operating standards, or MROS, for NIBIN sites. So any site that has access to the NIBIN network is supposed to be meeting this timeline. The first step, when you receive the evidence, you're supposed to receive the evidence, process it, and image that evidence within 2 days. Then, after that evidence has been imaged, within another 2 days, we need to review those correlations. And then that last day, that final 5th day, if we find one of those NIBIN leads, we have a day to release that lead to the affected agencies and affected divisions. And so the ATF expects that NIBIN sites are going to achieve this turnaround time in about 75 to 80% of those cases. And we need that buffer for cases that we do have to send for swabbing to the forensic biology or for latent print processing to the latent print section. But so the majority of our cases that don't have to go there are completed within this 5-day turnaround. Okay. This is just a list of the NIBIN partners in the Houston area. Some are labs, some are law enforcement, like the Houston Police Department Property Room has their own NIBIN unit. However, they don't do that last step. They don't review their own correlations. So some of these NIBIN partners do all the things. Actually, Jefferson County doesn't really do any of them on their own. They send their evidence to the Beaumont Police Department, but they're still actively participating in sending the evidence that they receive for NIBIN entry. So I went ahead and included them here. So I want to talk about NIBIN in the city of Houston and how that works, because we have both HFSC and the Houston Police Department property room participating in NIBIN entries for the city. So there is a crime, and if that crime involves evidence, that evidence is collected either by CSU or HPD. If that evidence involves bullets, they might be collected, they're not imaged. Now, they do serve a purpose, and I'll touch on that a little bit, but they don't serve a purpose for NIBIN. If there are cartridge cases collected and they are not a biohazard, meaning they don't appear to have been contaminated with bodily fluids, then they go to the HPD property room where they are imaged, and then the National NIBIN Correlation and Training Center, which is located in Huntsville, Alabama, they actually review their correlations and issue those leads. If the fired evidence is a biohazard, or the firearms that are NIBIN eligible come to HFSC, and we do the imaging and we do the correlation review. So what do I mean by eligible evidence? Because not all cartridge cases, not all crime guns are eligible for NIBIN. So that eligibility depends on the offense as well as the type of evidence. So the ATF loosely defines a crime gun as being eligible for NIBIN, and a crime gun is any firearm used in a crime or suspected of having been used in a crime. And this includes abandoned or confiscated firearms. And of course, it includes the gun as well as cartridge cases from crime scenes that are from those guns. As far as evidence type goes, we're talking about fired cartridge cases, either from the crime scene itself or test fires from the firearms. But those cartridge cases need to be from semi-automatic and full automatic pistols, semi-automatic and full automatic rifles, and pump action and semi-automatic 12-gauge shotguns. And that's per the ATF. They say that we don't need to image cartridge cases from revolvers, from lever actions, from bolt actions, and from other gauge shotguns other than 12 gauge. And that's really, that makes sense for the Houston area because most of our crimes are committed with those pistols, rifles, and 12 gauge shotguns. And just so we're all on the same page when I say cartridge case and when I say bullet, these are the cartridge cases and these are the bullets. So even though the bullets don't serve a purpose for NIBIN currently, they can be used for comparison. So if an investigator or if the court system is making a request, we can actually compare bullets to one another or back to a gun to determine if they were fired in the same firearm or not. Okay, before I move on to our actual workflow, is there any question? Okay, moving on. So I'm going to talk about our specific NIBIN workflow here at HFSC. And I'm going to focus really on the firearms. We do receive some of that fired evidence. It follows the same basic process, but the guns are the big thing that we get. So a firearm is received, it's processed and test fired. And that processing and test firing of firearms kind of creates two prongs that we have to deal with. The top prong here is the actual evidence documentation that's generated and the NIBIN notification that we issue to stakeholders. So once that evidence documentation is created, then the notification and the documents have to be reviewed. And then we issue that NIBIN notification lead. Or sorry, not a lead. We issue the NIBIN notification. The other prong is the actual images in NIBIN. And those correlations have to be reviewed. And if we find any leads, those leads have to be issued. So when you hear Amy or Peter talk about turnaround time, we're really measuring the turnaround time from the top part. We don't really have a a full representation of the turnaround time for the bottom part, but it's loosely correlated to what's happening as the top part is happening. So who does all of this, right? What is the staffing? So we have 3 NIBIN gun techs that actually work up and image the test fire, or work up the firearms and image the test fires. And of course, as Peter said, I had one that put in his resignation yesterday, so we're going to find out what 2 NIBIN techs can do for a little bit before we get to hire a third. We also have 1 NIBIN tech whose focus is to review those correlations and issue the leads. Then we have 9 firearms examiners that review all of the NIBIN work. They review the leads. They can also review NIBIN correlations. Every once in a while, they'll step in and do the guns. But they're the main focus of that review that happens. And then 1 manager, myself, and 1 supervisor. And we can also do reviews and NIBIN correlations, but we're not the heavy lifters in that. So you can see that even though we talk about our NIBIN techs, really it takes the entire firearms team to do NIBIN. Any questions before I start talking about numbers and capacity? Okay. So what you're going to see here is the number of guns that we have completed between February of 2019 and December of 2020. And again, this is what we saw before when we first started. We have this stair step, number of guns that kind of go up and down, but overall, there's an overall trend of the number of guns increasing. Now, I will say that in January of 2021, instead of receiving 600 guns, we did only receive 500. So we were back around here. And then I also want to show that the number of leads that we issue every month in correlation with the number of guns that we process. So the scale is off here. I want to make sure you understand that we're not issuing hundreds of leads every month like CODIS. So this is like a 10%. But just as a reminder that for each lead that we get, that's another set of reviews that we have to do. It's just creating more work for us. And so that 44 in the middle there is for the leads, just to show the difference in scale. So since we've been talking about what this crazy increase in the number of guns has been from 2019 to 2020, I kind of wanted to go back and take a look at what the last decade has been like for NIBIN. And I could actually probably go back further, but I thought 10 years was enough. So you can see that going back to 2010 and 2010 through 2014, man, we had pretty steady numbers of guns coming in year to year. And then starting from 2014 to 2015, we saw this steady increase to 2018. And then from 2018 to 2019, we kind of leveled off again. And so we've been following this trend for a while. So 2020, I was hoping would continue on that trend, but then of course we had the pandemic and we've had this increase in crime, and it's hard to say yet what that increase in crime is due to. Are we going to keep going on this upward trend, or are we going to level out once the pandemic is over? Our crime level is going to go back down again. It's too soon to say. We need more information, but this is definitely something that we're keeping an eye on. No matter what, however you look at it, we're gonna continue to go up in the number of guns, whether it's in 2021 or it's in 2024. We're still going to have an increase in the number of guns, and we'll have to increase our capacity. So are we keeping up? The short answer is yes. What you see here is the turnaround time, and focusing on November of 2019, when we moved all the way through December of 2020. And you can see November, December, January, we're recovering from the move, kind of getting our groove in the new facility. And then the turnaround time dipped. And, it was good, but not quite where we wanted it to be. And then in April, this is where we really were able to lower our turnaround time, but this is when the pandemic really hit and we reduced our staffing of firearms examiners to half staff. Firearms examiners were focused on doing only NIBIN reviews on their week at home. And so this really allowed the turnaround time to come down. And as you can see, of course, we've seen this upward trend in the guns in the last few months. And so our turnaround time has also ticked up. Some of that, especially in these last few months, is expected because of holidays that are coming around. But it is also the number of guns that are impacting that turnaround time. But it's still acceptable. Also depicted here is the number of overage hours. When I say overage hours, I mean both overtime and, like, in weekends and holidays, you may not earn overtime, but you're still working over 40 hours in that week. So whatever it is, it's overage hours. And you can see that it was up again while we were recovering from the move. There were still some special projects that we were doing, and then it dropped to very little. And then in October, November, December, again, it started going up, which again is somewhat expected because of the holidays. None of those overage hours that I can specifically attribute to anything COVID related. Nobody was in quarantine at that time. But those number of overage hours can present problems, right? Not only does it cause potential burnout and turnover from our staff, but of course there's just the financial overtime expenses that come with that. And it also doesn't leave a lot of time for those staff members to get additional training, like doing admin and tech reviews, maybe processing the fired evidence that comes. Currently, examiners do that. Being able to review the correlations, because currently we only have one NIBIN tech doing that. And it also doesn't leave time for other job and development opportunities. You know, we like to grow our people, develop them in their careers, things like team building and leadership and other career skills. So, you know, can we keep up? Yes, we can. Will it have an impact? Yes. It could be that we have to make the decision between, do we take a firearms examiner out of doing firearms comparisons to keep up with NIBIN? I don't know, but we have to evaluate that. So that's it for me. Any questions?
Doesn't sound like it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Great presentation. Appreciate all of the information. Okay, we are down to agenda item 14, which is adjournment. This will be a voice vote. I want to thank everybody for hanging in there. It's been a long day, but lots of really good information that we've needed and lots of good decisions. So I would like to see does anyone have a motion to adjourn at this time? Okay, Director Moore made the motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Director Cohen made the second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, great. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and we will see you next month. You guys have a great week and stay warm.
Bye.